Rihanna Cheska came from a noble family in which the blood of Arundel and Crichton was mixed. But she was a queen only in words. Her father betrayed her mother. Her half-sister was jealous of Rihanna. Even her husband, whom she considered her whole world, did not notice her love. The queen lost her child, her last hope, and drank poison given to her by her half-sister. If she could live another life, she would not love him so much. These are the words she spoke before her death. The girl woke up and realized that this looked like her childhood room. Her body had shrunk, so she was surprised. She saw the mourning dress she wore to her mother's funeral when she was 12. She had only worn mourning once in her life, and so she began to think that it was some kind of dream. She understood that this could not be because she drank poison and died. Rihanna still remembers the pain. It must be an illusion she sees while floating down the river to the afterlife. The girl does not understand how this is possible and why she looks like she is 12 again. If she really did go back in time, then someone would be knocking on her door now. The girl was in complete shock when the door opened. The woman was shocked that the lady was no longer sleeping. She approached her and assumed that the lady simply could not sleep. She knew that Rihanna was probably having a bad dream because of her mother. The maid remarked that she shouldn't be so sad, because if she gets sick, everything will be bad. The girl began to cry and realized that she had definitely returned to the past. Mary was a servant who had looked after Rihanna since she was a child. That was until she was thrown out after being falsely accused of stealing jewelry from Rihanna's half-sister Letitia. Rihanna snuggled up to her and started telling her that she missed her so much. The maid began to believe that she had just had a bad dream. She hugged the lady and said that it was nothing special. She had her father, and so there was no need to worry. Everything will be fine. But Rihanna knew that nothing good would happen. The father would bring this child into the house, and then he will take everything from Rihanna. Marie noted that the robber would be coming soon, so they should prepare. She doesn't know where he went after the funeral, but he'll definitely be there today. First, she needs to wipe her face. Rihanna decided to turn to Mary. She asked if Mary could find a lawyer for her. The maid was shocked by this. She thought that the girl was talking about Mr. Ned. The girl confirmed this and said yesterday that she should call this gentleman for her. Well, the maid didn't understand at all why she suddenly needed him. Rihanna tried to explain to her that now was not the time to talk. She had to check something in front of someone when her father returned. Maid, don't think that you'll be able to meet him now. She didn't understand what it was and why the lady suddenly wanted to meet him. But she smiled and told the lady that everything would be done. She left the room and said that the lady needed to wait a little. Rihanna was very grateful and sighed. Her mother's funeral was yesterday. She was sure that soon her father, Count Allison, would bring his illegitimate child. All the misfortunes will start again. She doesn't want that at all. But she came back at this time. Maybe it is God's blessing. Rihanna decided that this was her chance and looked down at her mourning uniform. She decided that this time she had enough of suffering. She would not suffer for anything. She put on this dress and went somewhere. Count Allison was a poor aristocrat from the lower classes, but everything changed when he met Rihanna's mother, who came from the Crichton family. The imperial family promised him the title of count and untold wealth if he married her, but the count did not love this girl. Rihanna's mother was struck down by an incurable disease. The count didn't care since he had a mistress. The day after his wife's funeral, he continued to commit immoral acts. He brought an illegitimate child into the house, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Father told Letitia that he was very glad that they could finally live together. The girl was also happy she would now live with her dad, like in a fairy tale. Although she said with fire that he was very poor, if it weren't for this woman, he would have taken her and her mother much earlier. Letitia noted that her mother always told her that he had not abandoned them, that he would definitely take them to himself, and she believed in it. Her father loves her very much. He has another daughter, but he loves only Letitia. Letitia said that she also loves him very much. But the main thing now is that they are together. She really gave in at this point before that life was hard for her. Previously, the teacher scolded her and didn't understand how she dared to take someone else's toy, even if he really wanted it. You can't take it away. Father said that Letitia should wait a little. His wife was seriously ill. As soon as she dies, he will take her to his home. The girl was happy that if the countess left this world, she would be able to leave with her father. She really wanted this woman to die quickly. Father told Letitia to be happy, because this was her home now. All the servants greeted the count and his daughter. Geoffrey asked the gentleman again who this girl was. The count said that this was his daughter. They could not live together before, but the man did not quite understand what his master was talking about. When the father saw his second daughter Rihanna, he asked her to come down to them. He told her to say hello to her little sister, but Rihanna yelled at him to get lost. The father was simply horrified, and the girl began to scream at him to get out of her house. Rihanna demanded that he leave not alone, but with his daughter. A few hours ago, the living room of the estate. Lawyer Ned arrived to see the lady at her request. The lady asked him to come and sit next to her. The man was surprised, because this girl had always been quiet. He doesn't know at all why she called him so suddenly. The girl said that she wanted to see her mother's marriage contract. She also wanted to know about her inheritance, which left the lawyer in complete shock. Rihanna wants him to confirm her inheritance rights and appoint a new guardian right now. The lawyer was completely at a loss. He did not understand what she was talking about because the count was still alive. Rihanna noted that if he refused to fulfill her request, she would accuse her father and him of tax evasion. Then the lawyer realized that things were bad. He couldn't believe that a 12-year-old girl was saying this. Everyone would be surprised if she accused her father when her godmother, the queen, finds out about it. The investigation will be thorough. Then the lawyer became even more scared because her godmother was the queen. The gentleman asked if he had heard that one could end up behind bars for failure to pay taxes and treason against the royal family. Geoffrey asked again what the lady had just said to the count. The man didn't understand at all what Rihanna was allowing herself to do. She should immediately come up to him, but the girl said that she and the lawyer had just completed all the necessary procedures. From now on, the only owner of this house is Rihanna Allison. She received this estate from her mother by right. Grab didn't understand at all what rights she was talking about. She's not in her right mind right now. Rihanna approached Geoffrey and said that he should check this document and let the count see it. Geoffrey began to read that if the marriage between if Alessandro and Anastasia Previous are to dissolve, all their property will be transferred to state control. The only heirs may be the children of Anastasia Previous. Therefore, her biological daughter, Rihanna Allison, receives the title and all property. The document is recognized as valid by the Ned Guan, the lawyer for the Allison family. Geoffrey, with a sullen face, informed the gentleman that the young lady now owned the estate. The father was simply horrified. He grabbed this document. The count began to read it himself and was simply horrified, so he decided to tear it up. It's important to me what rights she has. She can't use them until she comes of age. The father shouted that she should obey him. Parents decide whether to live or die or their children. The girl said that he had not read the contract completely. This marriage was between Arundel and Crichton. In this case, the child can choose his own guardian, and Rihanna chose her uncle from Crichton for this role, so he can no longer tell her what to do. Father was simply furious. All the servants were simply in shock. The count began to shout that he did not understand how she could give his property to the Crichtons. Rihanna noted that she keeps repeating over and over again that he no longer has any rights here. Now he has to take this child and get out of here. The count was extremely angry and swung at his daughter, saying that he did not understand how she dared to talk like that to her own father. Rihanna closed her eyes and waited for the blow, but her maid Mary took the full brunt of it. The girl immediately rushed to her and tried to bring her to her senses. Geoffrey had no idea what he was allowing you to do. The count shouted that if he did not want to receive it, then he must stand in his way. But the man believed that nothing of the sort was possible. An honest man should stop the violence. Geoffrey said that he would call me for such behavior, so the count began to say that he had completely gone crazy and that he could not even do this in death. The count turned to the servants and asked why they were all standing and looking. They must remove this Geoffrey immediately. Well, they kept standing, so the count realized they were bastards. Rihanna asked for attention and said that she was ordering them around as the new mistress. With due respect, they must lead the count and his child out of the estate. Her father tried to tell her something the girl also called her sister, but Rihanna replied that she was not a sister to her. She recalled how Letizia, already in adulthood, said that she should have been in Rihanna's place. Letitia told her that they had one father for both of them. She came so that her sister wouldn't kick them out, but Rihanna said that her mother made this dress for her when she was alive. It is very dear to her. The girl did not know what to answer and said that her dad simply brought it to her. Rihanna noted that this was the only dress she would get from her. Rihanna then noted that there was no need to worry, they could live together as they wanted. But now they have to get out of here. The illegitimate girl is still behind the door. Already in the living room, Rihanna was wiping Mary's face. The lady did not understand why she exposed herself to attack. It was stupid. The maid said that all of this, that she was still little, no child should be punished like that by their parents. Mary said that if the count had hit her, it would have hurt her very much. It's better for her to be hurt, and she thinks that anyone would do the same. Rihanna asked if Mary would go to Crichton with her. Mary was surprised and asked again why she suddenly wanted to go there, and the lady answered that she needed to leave as soon as possible, and she asked her to go with her. Mary was born in Arundel. She was an orphan. She worked as a servant to Anastasia, who saw her talent. Later, Mary began to serve Rihanna. The girl understood that the maid wanted to stay here, but she can do it if she wants to work somewhere else. Then she can write a letter of recommendation. The maid asked again what she was saying, because she will always be with the mistress. She has no family, so she wants to serve Rihanna. And if the lady wants it, then she will go. After that, the maid was a little perplexed. She asked again if it was necessary to warn the queen before leaving. The queen loves her very much, and she will be upset if the lady leaves without saying goodbye. So she must say that they are leaving. She is indeed right, Queen Cheska. During the civil war for the throne, she fought on the battlefield as an army commander. Hertzia put an end to the rebellion of the aristocracy. This is a queen with incredible power. Her son was once loved by Rihanna. In the past, she became her mother. Since ancient times, the aristocracy in Arundel has wielded enormous power. After the king's death, the nobility opposed Hertzia's coronation because she was a woman. They crowned her cousin, which led to the start of a civil war. Hertzia handed over the throne Zainu on the condition that her son should inherit the throne. It turned out that the war was over. But soon the cousin died, and the boy received the throne. The regency of Hertzia began. And the purge means she suppressed the opposition by enacting several reforms and became the most powerful ruler in Arundel. The only person the queen wanted, besides her son, was her goddaughter, Rihanna. Rihanna recalled how she greeted the queen with her mother. The woman was very happy when she saw Anastasia and Rihanna. Anastasia noted that they had not seen Her Majesty for a long time. She also asked for forgiveness for not visiting her mistress for so long. The woman noted that her health was most important, and she was grateful that she had brought her daughter with her, so now she offered to sit down. She had prepared some cookies for them, so the girl was very grateful to her. When the queen saw Rihanna, you were shocked because she was so cute. She is also a beauty like her mother Anastasia. Noticed that the lady was flattering, but they really were very similar. When Rihanna was walking, she started following a butterfly, and it led her to a huge tree. The girl noticed that there was a bird there with its feet stuck in the vine. The girl realized that she needed to somehow help her, but suddenly there was a voice behind her that told Rihanna to leave her. Turning back, the girl was very surprised and asked who he was. Then the bird broke free, and the girl began to ask him to help her. The boy clicked his tongue and told her to look there, the bird would be eaten soon anyway. This is the fate of this bird, they can't help me in any way. But then the boy noticed that she was crying. He asked her to stop crying, because everyone would think that he made her cry. But she didn't stop crying, so he told her to stop because he would save this bird. The boy started climbing the tree to help her. The cat almost grabbed the bird, but the boy jumped and saved it. But he began to fall and fell from a rather enormous height. Rihanna immediately ran to him. The cat ran away. The boy stood up and began to breathe loudly. He had this bird in his hands, but it broke free and began to fly away. As she was flying away, one feather fell from her and landed right on Rihanna's forehead. The guy didn't understand at all what it was. He was terrified. He risked his life to save the bird, and she didn't even look at him. Rihanna just took the feather and asked if he had seen it. It was an atraxia. The boy was simply horrified and asked if this bird was really an atraxia. Atraxia. In Arundel it is called atraxia, and in Crichton it is called mystera. They say that they are demigods and can live both in the human world and in heaven. They are different to me from ordinary birds in the human world, but in heaven their wings become large and shining. Legend has it that whoever catches an atraxia feather will be granted one wish. The girl said that she definitely saw it. The bird suddenly grew larger, began to sparkle brightly, and flew away into the sky. The guy was simply perplexed. I liked it because it was basically amazing. I saw such a miracle. She was sure that it was that same bird. And the boy asked if she really didn't even ask if he was okay. So the girl decided to ask him if everything was okay. The guy stood up and told her not to do him a favor. But suddenly, she told him to just take her feather. It fell from Atraxia, and it will fulfill any of his wishes. She gave him this feather because he saved her, and now he can make a wish. The boy smiled and asked if this meant that it would really come true later. Rihanna said that it was true Dima succeeded if he keeps the feather with him and asks with all his heart, the Atraxia will fulfill his wish. The boy asked who Dima was, and she replied that he was her cousin who knew everything. The boy was surprised at first, and then told her to take it. The girl began to believe that he simply didn't like it. She tried to somehow say that this feather was for him. The boy said that he liked everything. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have even thought about saving this bird. So he asks her to take it because it is his gift. Rihanna smiled widely and was very grateful to him. The guy even became embarrassed. After that, he decided to ask who she was anyway. Rihanna's mother came up to them. The girl was surprised when she saw her. The queen came up and said that she would like Igor and Rihanna to be introduced. It was very wonderful. Alison's daughter, Rihanna. Anastasia approached His Highness and asked for forgiveness if her reign had caused him any inconvenience. The boy remarked that he was very glad to see the countess, while the queen turned to her son. She asked what happened to Igor's clothes. There were a lot of them. Igor said that nothing special. He was just lying on the ground in the garden out of boredom. He said that he had to go now, so he had to detour. At the age of 5, Igor became the heir. His mother said that this throne belonged to her, so he should obey her. Mother said that he should be smart because she would do everything for him. His mother was constantly busy with questions, and he just read books. When he was 12 years old, he became very ill and had a terrible fever. His temperature has been going down for 4 days. Now the queen can't believe there is no cure. The doctor said that he thought that it would go down today. He had already given him medicine. All that was left was to wait. Mother asked Igor not to do this. This is just the beginning. He cannot leave now. 2 days later, the lady asked how His Majesty was. For the cards she reported that everything had passed. The temperature had dropped, so he would soon be on his feet. Now he needs rest. The woman sighed with relief, and the servants were also happy. In the middle of the night, Igor opened his eyes and noticed that a doctor was sleeping on a chair next to him, and another man was on the floor. Igor didn't understand where his mother was now, so he went to look for her. As he walked down the corridor, he heard his mother talking about how Igor needed to be married as soon as possible. Marquis Rozan, a close confidant of the queen, noted that His Majesty is still young, so he believes that it is too early to think about marriage, and he does not understand why the lady is talking about it so suddenly. The queen asked him if he had ever thought that Igor might suddenly die. Then, something irreversible could happen to the throne, so it must pass to His Majesty's son. The queen thought so too, which is why they needed him to have children. The aristocrats are hostile to Queen Igor. You need to prepare in advance for the fact that your son may make a mistake. Otherwise, they will lose the power they have fought for so long. The guy didn't understand who she meant when she said they needed to be prepared for him to make a mistake, so he didn't quite understand why the power would be taken away. After that, he remembered sitting on the throne when he was 5 years old, and his mother said that this throne belongs to her, so he should listen to her. He is just a replacement for his mother. He now knows it. The marquise asked the lady who she was considering as a bride, and she replied that you should be their man. So this is Anastasia's daughter. The marquise believed that the lady was now talking about Countess Alison. The queen said it was a girl and her goddaughter, so she ordered him to ask Anastasia to bring her daughter. If Rihanna and Igor spend a lot of time together from childhood, it will easily lead to marriage. Igor turned around and started running away from his mother's room. She wants him to get married and have children. It seems like he's just an animal for them, so he ran to the tree. He sat down next to him and began to cry very loudly. He was in a lot of pain. He looked at the palace and remembered how his mother said that the aristocrats were hostile to her and Igor, and he needed to prepare in advance for the fact that his son might make a mistake. After these words, he realized that he was just his mother's puppet. If he marries the one she chose, he will never love this girl. He remembered his mother's words about how she wanted to introduce them, and the girl's smile. He wondered if the girl there knew that she was just a tool to maintain his mother's power. 5 years later, Rihanna was walking in the garden. She was 17 years old at the time. She noticed someone looking at her, so she turned back. Well, there was no one behind, so she was confused. In fact, it was Igor. Igor was also 17 years old. He was embarrassed when he looked at her. Basil approached him and remarked that this looked like Lady Allison, adding that she was already a real woman. The man also noted that they would soon get married, and the lady would become a member of the royal family. But His Majesty simply ran away. Basil was offended because he couldn't even be told the truth. Igor does not understand at all why he is so worried about this girl. He does not care whether she joins their family or dies. After this, Igor felt very pleased his beloved was lying next to him. He kissed her. Rihanna said his name and smiled. Well, then he screamed and realized it was just a dream. It's just awful. He doesn't understand what kind of dreams we have. The queen thought that they were just lucky with their bride because he liked her too. Igor was 19 years old then. He said that it was some kind of nonsense. After all, it was his mother who decided everything for him. The woman asked what he was saying. She was just worried about him and picked the girl who was the most suitable. She doesn't think Rihanna is a bad person, and she doesn't understand why he's so resistant. She thought that he simply did not understand anything, the floor table, and also shouted at her. Of course he knew she would say it again, so he walked out and slammed the door. But he saw Rihanna behind the door. Then he immediately calmed down. He approached her and asked if she had heard about everything. As she can see, he has a strained relationship with his mother. In principle, that's good. It's better for her to know about it anyway. Igor told her to think carefully and decide whether she was really suitable for the role of queen. After that, he walked away, but the girl did not understand what just happened and what he was talking about. After this, the queen came out to Rihanna, who immediately greeted Her Majesty. The queen told her to come to her office and noted that the girl was already quite grown up. If Anastasia could see her, she would be proud of her. The queen said that she should have someone instead of a mother, a person who would help teach etiquette. The girl was in shock. I didn't understand what the lady was getting at, but the queen had already introduced Countess Egel to her. The countess will serve her mistress faithfully. Now she lives in the palace and must know etiquette well. All because of this, that she will become the future queen, and the queen asked if she could give Arundel an heir in the future. At first, the girl remained silent, but then she said that this was indeed the case. The queen also remembered that there is only a month left. Igor continues to postpone the wedding. He is supposedly very busy. His Majesty postponed the wedding, so she was a little upset. The queen approached Rihanna and said that she was sure that the girl would cope and would soon be her daughter. If she obeys the queen, life in the palace will not be a burden to her. After that, Rihanna, the lady bowed to you and said that she promised to eat from her. Rihanna must prepare for her marriage this month. The countess showed her the history of Arundel and the royal family, which she must learn by heart, the need to know all the aristocrats. The countess said that the lady was thin, but that was not enough. She had no curves, so she also needed to put on a corset. She must raise her head if you want to become a queen. You need to straighten your back and put your chest forward, the straighter the body. This is what I think with her. After that, Rihanna became a bride. Wedding day, temple. Before the eyes of God, the priest calls them husband and wife. The queen was very happy, but there was no happiness on the faces of the newlyweds. When they got married, everyone shouted glory to King Igor and Queen Rihanna. The royal apartment's Chamberlain Basil reported that the marriage of the king and queen consort had been consummated. The girl was embarrassed as she lay in bed with the king. The silver hair he saw in his dream, she is now definitely his wife. Rihanna was very embarrassed when he kissed her neck. Things went well at first, but she is the only one he will have to live with. Rihanna was shocked when she saw that he was listening to her heartbeat. The gentleman simply noticed that her heart beats, so with his heart, she became his wife by the choice of the queen, but he does not understand how he could not choose her. They will share body and soul for the rest of their days. He knows that she is embarrassed because so many eyes are directed at them. Perhaps she will be on his side. It was very scary. The girl pulled him away from her, and the gentleman began to believe that this was her answer, and she confirmed it. She refused him. It was a demonstration of his mother's power. But then the voice turned to Igor and said that he must listen to it. Igor, according to him, this is a marriage of puppets. It's nothing new that she refuses him. The queen did not understand at all what Igor was thinking. He had to get down to business. They were just standing over the girl. Refusing on the first night, despite witnesses, he will not be kind to her. The girl said that if she left before a connection was formed between them, she would be able to dissolve the marriage, and then Igor would avoid an unwanted marriage. She doesn't want to live with a man who doesn't love her like her mother. It would be better if she lived alone in a monastery. Igor said that he remembered that he had to learn to endure, even if he didn't like it. The choice is hers, but if she refuses, the marriage will end. After this, the candles were extinguished, the witnesses left, and the girl lay in tears. Igor reached out his hand to her, but it covered itself, and so he removed it, and thought about how he had raped her on the very first night period. So he just lay down next to her and tried not to think about it. After that, he turned to her and said that today was the last day he would endure her tears. Now she must take responsibility for her choice, even if it hurts. Subsequent fulfillment of the marital duty was obligatory. If Rihanna didn't do it on the appointed day, the queen and the aristocrats would accuse her of dereliction of duty. Therefore, the couple spent the night in anxiety and tension. Rihanna didn't want it. Even the king himself didn't quite want it. Igor couldn't believe that marriage should be like this. Royal Library, Igor turned to Basil. He asked how long he had been married to his wife. The man said that they had been married for 3 years, but before that, they had been dating for 10 years. And now they still look like newlyweds. But he didn't understand why he was asking his master. Later, Igor said what would happen if the person he had been with for more than 10 years lied to him. The chamberlain was simply shocked and said that, "His Highness, you must tell me such a thing, because it is impossible. His wife would never change for him. She is a holy man." Igor provided him with a tax report, a list of aristocrats who had paid taxes to me over the past 10 years. His servant realized that he had simply been deceived. Most are connected to the Dowager Queen, but there are many people on their side. Igor is determined that they must grab their opponents by the throat. The man said there was a problem, and His Majesty assumed he meant Count Allison. This is true if the authorities have not reached the Queen enough to control her close associates, then this can anger her. Igor said that they haven't even started yet. He's already scared. Tax car funds are a great sin, that's what I told his mother. While the Queen's woman was speaking, because some of the aristocrats on this list did not pay a large sum. This undermined the foundations of the state. That's right. We must take advantage of this opportunity and warn the aristocrats. Igor spoke about Count Allison, and the lady asked again whether he had also withheld a large sum of money. The Queen Consort's family cannot be allowed to commit such crimes, so he must send the Count to jail and decide on his title, break off his marriage with Rihanna. Igor was completely shocked by this. She told him to break off the marriage with the girl she had chosen, and now she really wants him to overthrow her. So he decided to ask again if she was trying to protect her people now. He assumed that Rihanna might be involved, but she was the Queen's goddaughter and should be under her protection. He thought that punishing the Earl would be enough. If he read that the Queen would protect her, then he is mistaken, she would not do that. You need to separate your personal life and your duties, because of her people may doubt his work. The Queen must be perfect. I am ready to sacrifice myself for the king at any moment. She was a pawn from the start. Igor was very angry. Basil said something to His Majesty, but the master did not listen to him. The king said that everyone on this list does it with a penalty. It is his defeat. The servant tried to say that this was just the beginning and that everything would change later, but Igor believed that it would be harder later. He is absolutely sure of this, so there is no point in continuing this. Even the Queen dumped Rihanna. He doesn't know why she's the reason for the failure, or if he could just let her go. She probably doesn't even know about it. The girl came back again because she thought someone was watching her. She looked out the window, after which Igor became embarrassed and worried. Her presence embarrasses him, misses through the banquet hall. The Queen turned to His Majesty and asked if he liked the wine and the game, and replied that it was perfect for this dinner. The lady was glad that she heard this everything for his pleasure. Also, a special wine from Toulouse grapes was selected. The Empire of Toulouse is a new religious state. Arundel and Crichton have been feuding for a long time over border disputes. The Toulouse Empire is located in the center of the continent. The only trade route of Arundel was land and could always be lost. So how it passed through Toulouse, it was necessary to carefully monitor the situation. Therefore, Igor always avoided conflicts with Toulouse and tried to develop vile trade routes. The Queen has heard that Igor is interested in maritime trade, and it seems he already knows about his shipbuilding business in Crichton. Igor said that they should not strengthen their sea routes through active trade, but the queen said that she knew about this herself. She knows what he's thinking, but the problem is Toulouse. He was so fascinated by the sea because of that empire, but that shouldn't undermine Arundel. True, they have an ally at sea, Crichton. Therefore, the man is not sure that they need an exit home sea. The queen is the heir of the Crichton and Arundel families. The man also noted that this is exactly how I can think about the sea, as long as there is a queen, a symbol of a strong union between the two countries. The Toulouse Empire is spreading its power at an alarming rate. Therefore, it is necessary to know when to lose wine in a glass becomes poison. Now is the time for trading and to reduce risks. She hopes that the master understands her. Igor threw the glass away, and the woman began to think that the wine was too strong. But this cannot be. The hot blood of the young ruler could not overcome the wine. The woman noted that she hoped that he would please her and direct his hot young blood towards a successor. Igor was very angry. There was not a single person among them on his side. Rihanna ran after His Majesty and asked him to wait. Igor turned to her and asked what was the matter. She may have said later that it was too late to talk, but she was grateful for the last time. Igor didn't understand what she was talking about. The girl noted that he had protected her father, Newline. He simply couldn't believe that she was thanking him for the act that he regretted the most. He asked if she had finished, and the girl said that she would actually like to report what the queen had told her. Igor got noticed because he doesn't want to hear about it. Now he knows that she is on his mother's side. She couldn't say anything more, so he turned and left. The girl grabbed his hand and said that it wasn't that, but he pushed her against the wall. Games asked with a shout whether she really decided to sympathize with the queen and insult him. But now she also wants to find an excuse. The girl was all on edge and tried to say at least something. Today, Igor was already convinced of everything. For her, his mother is more important than he is. And now he tells her to watch how such a fool will listen to the decrees of the Cloud Queen. He grabbed her hand and dragged her along. She begged him to stop. Rihanna knew she couldn't calm him down. She just wanted to explain everything. She doesn't understand at all where she made a mistake. The emperor threw her on the sofa. She recalled how on their wedding night, he told her that this marriage was her choice. The girl started crying because she didn't choose this. This break was not with her consent from the very beginnings. Igor suddenly remembered his mother's words about how she hoped that they would give her an heir. Rihanna didn't understand at all why Igor just picked her up in his arms and carried her somewhere. She doesn't know what he's saying. She wants to hear, but she can't. When Rihanna woke up, she started wondering if it was a dream when she saw the shooting star. The king did it again last night. She doesn't want to go through it again. However, she does not understand what it was. Perhaps it was a dream. She closed her eyes and decided to sleep a little longer. The Dowager Queen's office, she really likes this red rose. It has a rich color, and the aroma is also wonderful. Igor demanded that she speak on the topic. The queen noted that he saw that he knew that because of the case he was not paying taxes. The nobility again raised a fuss about the heirs. Igor asked when they hadn't done this. They were really annoying him. The queen told Igor that 3 years had already passed, and she began to believe that there were problems with Rihanna. He needed heirs to strengthen his power. She believed that was what she wanted. Igor noted that she shouldn't worry because he and Rihanna were still young. The queen remarked that he seemed to be the only one who thought so. She knows everything. He has not been in the queen's chambers since the last banquet. The king leaves his wife whenever he wants. Rihanna doesn't want to be exiled. The lady asked why he didn't meet her sister. Later they could say that this was Rihanna's child. She doesn't like either Count Allison or his wife. If he wants to protect Rihanna, then the heir needs to be of the same blood. The count agrees with her. This woman seems to think of him as cattle for breeding. The woman asked him to accept her proposal because Rihanna wanted the same thing. It seems that now Mom thinks that she is doing something good, but soon she will be thrown out. She will lose everything. He is already prepared for this. The maid came out and announced that the queen consort had arrived. The queen immediately said that this was a good moment, so she should come in. Igor was surprised when he saw her, and the girl said that she was asking him to dance the first dance with her sister at the next one. She is a debutante. It will be difficult for her to find a suitable partner. The queen noted that this will be an important event for her sister. The emperor was surprised that she had already agreed to his mother's proposal, so he also asked if she had discussed everything with her family. The girl noted that this was indeed the case. Her father had already given his consent to this. Igor sighed and said that if they wanted it so much, then he would do it. On the day of the ball, the emperor danced with Rihanna's half-sister Letizia. Everyone was in complete shock because she had just made her debut and she was already dancing with the king. Apparently he liked her very much. But many also believed that this was completely unacceptable because he had a wife. Rihanna felt unwell, so she decided to go out. The king noticed this. Letitia was only glad that she left them. The lady went out into the garden to breathe fresh air. Then she came to the place where she first met the guy. She remembered how he climbed a tree to save a bird. Suddenly, someone came up behind her and said that he knew Raya liked chubby rabbits. But the best thing about rabbits is their juicy meat, very tasty, yum yum. The girl was happy when she saw Dima. This is Dmitri Privius, Rihanna's cousin from the Crichton royal family. He asked her when she got so tall. He thought that Raya missed him very much. Last time she said that she would not talk to him anymore. He prepared these flowers for her. Rihanna said that because he drew a beard on her favorite doll, Dima just thought he would have time to erase it before she returned. And he didn't know that they wouldn't see each other for so long. After that, she started crying and he started crying, which was very difficult for her. She asked her to stop crying and kiss her on the forehead. There's no point in crying if someone sees it. They'll think that it was he who made her cry. Rihanna noted that it was true he made the queen cry. Dima asked if he had really made a serious diplomatic mistake. If she had known that he was coming, she would have prepared herself. So she decided to ask him what happened, because he came so suddenly. Dima also didn't know that he would need to come so urgently. On his way to another state, he received a message and joined the delegation. The emperor approached them from behind and remarked that this was very strange. He did not remember a delegation from Crichton heading towards them. Rihanna was very scared when she saw His Majesty. The gentleman believed that he was the Queen's cousin. He was glad to meet you. He is Dmitri Privius. He arrived on a diplomatic mission from Iskreton. He was worried about his cousin, the Queen of Arundel. The king was surprised because he had made an audience at such a late hour and not even at a ball. It was too secret a place for a meeting, and he asked the Queen again if she really thought so too. Rihanna immediately began to say that His Majesty had misunderstood her. The gentleman only wanted to know how she was feeling. Then Dmitri called her baby. The girl was very scared. Dmitri said that they often saw each other with Her Majesty when she was a baby, but now everything is different. They had no opportunity to agree on a meeting, and he asks His Majesty to forgive her worthless brother. The king considered him a scoundrel. Everyone knows that he is a genius, and diplomacy constantly riding on his last name. Perhaps he should leave him alone. Igor said that the queen should pay more attention to organizing meetings, and the lady also agreed with him. Rihanna was very embarrassed, because her cousin hadn't called her that in a long time. However, Igor can't just leave him alone, so he went up to the queen and kissed her hand. He was irritated by it, so he said he would like to spend time alone with his wife. Dima looked at his sister, but her look said that everything was fine, and she would cope. After this, the king began to leave with her, but Dima tried to stop them. He said that this girl is wonderful, so he asks that he treat her accordingly. Igor thanked the gentleman for the instruction, but his wife, Queen, they are just a girl. Such meetings and the use of such nicknames should never be repeated in the future. Despite his relationship, he must remember that he is here on a diplomatic visit. The gentleman promised to take this into account. He kept his hand in a fist, because he understood that he could not influence this in any way. Igor did not understand at all how it was possible that the king was receiving a diplomat from another country. Perhaps he is not the ruler of this state, but someone else. Rihanna tried to somehow correct this situation, and said that he came at the invitation of the Queen Dowager. Igor was so furious that his emotions literally exploded. He could not cope with his rage, and having lost control, began to throw all the objects that came to his hands. Everything pointed to the fact that their connection was based only on the queen. There was nothing else between them. And this thought distanced them even more. Rihanna could not understand how His Highness could say such cruel words. She felt deeply offended, but she did not dare to answer. After his words, the girl weakened her legs, gave way, and she fell. He looked at her, but did not understand what was happening. Her gaze was directed straight at him. When Rihanna woke up, she noticed that Igor was next to her. He sat as if he had never left her for a minute, as if he was guarding her peace. Her surprise knew no bounds when she saw him raise his head and look at her. His voice trembled as he asked if she was okay. Igor couldn't hide the tears that were rolling down his cheeks. Rihanna assured him that she was fine, but she wondered why he was holding her hand. She apologized for looking so weak and confused. However, Igor, excited, sincerely admitted that he was glad that she had woken up. She couldn't believe her eyes. The strong and reserved Igor was really crying. It was a real discovery for her. He said that he didn't know the real her at all, didn't notice her difficulties, and didn't understand how hard it was for her all this time. Igor asked her for forgiveness, and then hugged her tightly as if he was afraid of losing her again. He promised that he would now do everything to protect her and their future child. He said that a doctor had recently come. The doctor gave important news. Rihanna is expecting a baby. The reason for her fainting was anemia, which is common during pregnancy. Now she needs to take care of herself and avoid stress. Hearing this, the girl could not hold back her tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She felt a deep happiness, realizing that soon a child would appear in their life. This news filled her heart with warmth. Rihanna was incredibly happy. Now she and Igor would become a family. This was what she had dreamed of for so long. Allison's estate. Letitia was seething with indignation. She couldn't help but wonder why the king had stopped paying attention to her. At the ball, he danced with her several times, and she was sure that she had impressed him. Her beauty could not go unnoticed. She remembered how he gently hugged her waist, holding a glass in his other hand. His gaze, deep and penetrating, literally pierced her soul. When she felt his breath so close, everything seemed perfect. But then suddenly, he left without saying a word. Letitia was completely perplexed. How could he do this? He just left her to go after Rihanna, and this did not give her any peace. Deciding that she would not tolerate such humiliation, the girl, in a fit of rage, began to destroy everything around her. She was determined to take revenge. In the royal garden, the women were discussing the latest rumors, and one of them decided to ask if they had heard anything new. The others looked at each other in surprise, asking what exactly was being discussed. They were waiting for an explanation to understand what the question was about. The woman was hinting at the red-haired girl with whom the king had danced at the ball. Her tone betrayed interest, mixed with a bit of envy. The women learned that this was the queen's sister, but the woman noted that she was not her real sister. She was the illegitimate child of the count. He brought her into the house immediately after the death of the countess. The woman, having dared to ask the question, decided to clarify how events could develop further. She was interested in whether it was possible for her, being the child of a mistress, to become the king's bride. This question did not give her peace. The girl seemed to be completely confident in her abilities. She acted as if all the important decisions had already been made, and her future was determined. Her behavior right in front of the Dowager Queen left everyone perplexed. Such obvious disregard for the rules of decency suggested that she had neither shame nor conscience. Rihanna's sister under her wing. However, the reason for this attitude was only because the queen allowed her to behave this way. It was a real mystery. Why did the Allison family start appearing at the palace so often? Their presence confused many. It seemed that there was some hidden plan behind it. Meanwhile, King Igor sat in his office. Engrossed in reading, he tried to distract himself from the palace intrigues and think about his next steps. He noticed how quickly rumors began to spread. As soon as something happened, the news immediately became a topic of discussion in every corner of the palace. Basil noted that this was exactly what he wanted. These rumors could ruin the Dowager Queen's plans, which would undoubtedly anger her. The king did not want rumors about his family to become the main topic of conversation at tea parties. The problem with the heir had already been resolved, and it would be better if these discussions died down sooner. However, the girl approached him and suddenly admitted that she had admired him for a long time. These words caught him off guard and made him think. She then added that her elder sister should never have become queen, a statement that sounded as if there was a hidden reproach in her words. Despite everything she and Igor ended up together, the situation was rather awkward for both of them, and no one seemed to know how to fix it. Rihanna's pregnancy ruined his mother's carefully laid plans. However, even this did not bring Igor much joy. At this time, Rihanna was writing a letter to Dima. She mentioned that when he received it, he would already know about her pregnancy. She was happy that she would finally have a child. Although her meeting with Dima was short, it brought her joy, and as she believed luck. Basil congratulated the queen on her daughter-in-law's expecting a baby, saying it was truly wonderful news for the entire family. Dima, despite his worries about her marriage, was glad that everything had improved. The aristocrats began to treat Rihanna with more respect. Rihanna had been feeling heavy lately. She found solace in reading and sewing baby clothes, considering these the happiest days of her life. She couldn't wait for the baby to be born. She could already imagine the baby calling him uncle. With that, Rihanna said goodbye, full of hope for the future. She also got along with Igor. Everything is great between them. She believes that in the future it will be even better, so you shouldn't worry about her too much. The king was eagerly awaiting the revelation of the secret of whether the baby would be a girl or a boy. He often thought about it, not hiding his curiosity, and wondered how it would change their lives. Rihanna thought it was most likely a boy. She was relying on her feelings, trying to understand the clues of fate. Despite all the speculation, the king confidently stated that it does not matter to him who is born. The main thing is that it will be their child, and he is ready to love him as he is. Rihanna was beginning to suspect that Igor was hiding something. He mentioned that she would understand his words when the time came, but she couldn't stop thinking that he knew something. Igor was extremely busy, and it became obvious. However, he often came to her, assuring her that she did not have to worry about anything. Everything was going as it should. At Count Allison's estate was tense. Letizia was beside herself with anger. She was irritated that her sister was pregnant, and she blamed the king for this because he no longer came to see her. Letizia could not accept the situation. She said that the king was treating her unfairly. Her father tried to calm her down, saying that everything would change when the child was born. She still hoped that with the birth of the child, the king would reconsider his attitude towards her. Letizia sincerely believed that she could regain his favor. Her thoughts were full of confusion. She could not understand how the king could leave her. However, her father assured her that there was no need to worry, and the Dowager Queen also advised her to be patient. The queen carefully asked the maid if her request had been fulfilled. She clearly did not want anyone to know about her mission. Deep down, she hoped that the maid had done everything unnoticed. This was an important part of her plan, and the queen did not want to take any risks. The maid confirmed that everything had been done exactly as instructed. After that, the queen carefully looked through the letter, checking its contents. When everything was ready, the maid added that Count Allison was waiting for an answer. She asked what to tell him so as not to miss the moment. The queen noticed that Letizia was much more cunning than her sister. Therefore, she ordered that Letizia be allowed to be invited to the palace and that everything necessary be done without delay. However, the maid suggested that if the mistress was afraid of mistakes, the matter could be entrusted to someone else, but the queen cut her off abruptly, insisting that everything had already been decided. She stood firm. The whole plan was thought out, and now it was only necessary to bring it to completions. The queen knew she needed to stir things up a bit. This was the key to her strategy, and she wasn't going to back down. Meanwhile, Igor, having saddled his horse, was heading into the forest. His dog was with him. They were hunting a wolf, and this was an important matter for him. Using his weapon, Igor quickly dealt with the wolf. It was not easy, but his experience helped him succeed. Basil noticed how huge the wolf was. Its size impressed her, and she realized that this was no ordinary predator. Igor explained that this wolf was the leader of the pack. He had been watching its movements for a long time in order to wait for the right moment to hunt. The chamberlain remarked that he had never seen anything like it, and was shocked that the gentleman had managed to do it in the dark. Igor explained that he had been forced to make a long journey deep into the dense forest. He knew it was dangerous, but there was no other choice. His decision was dictated by circumstances. Basil reminded His Highness that he had not come here for the wolf alone. There was a note of surprise in his words, and perhaps reproach for the mission involved more than that. The Black Forest of Chalcis, as it was called, got its name from the tall trees that blocked out even the rays of the sun. This dark, mysterious forest was located in the northern part of Arendelle. Crossing the river that winds through the dense forests of Chalcis, one enters the Empire of Toulouse. This forest served as a secret passage for spies and bandits, which gave it a bad reputation. They haven't gone too far into the forest yet, Apparently, negotiations with the Queen Mother are continuing, and perhaps something has already been secretly transmitted to Crichton. The Queen was clearly behind this, but her true intentions remained a mystery. After her pregnancy, the Allison family seemed to fade into the shadows, leaving many questions in their wake. It was like the calm before the storm. This situation could not be trusted. We had to find out as quickly as possible what exactly the Queen was planning and what her plans were. There was little time left. Soon it would be completely dark, and it would be dangerous to move on. Caution and haste were needed at the same time. Carrying the huge carcass of a wolf would require a lot of strength. The task was difficult and could not be accomplished without good preparation. Igor firmly stated that he was ready to become bait. His decision left no other options. He consciously took risks to achieve his goal. Basil, who initially supported the idea, was soon shocked. He became afraid for His Majesty. The plan seemed absurd and dangerous. He desperately begged the king to abandon this idea. How could the monarch expose himself to such a threat? Igor seemed to be saying something completely incomprehensible. The gentleman replied with a grin that this was precisely the reason for his determination. Everyone would dream of being in his place, but did not understand the full weight of this role. Let them learn that what seems sweet and desirable is actually poisonous. Not all power brings joy as they believed. Between Counts Clovis and Allison, probably discussing something important and possibly threatening, Igor noted that this played into their hands. He was going to use Letitia to make this event turn out in their favor. He also tasked Basil with dealing with the wolf. The task was clear: bring him to the palace despite the difficulties and dangers. The man couldn't believe his ears and asked again if the gentleman had really just said those words. His shock was genuine. The king calmly explained that this was punishment for the late announcement of the Earl's meeting. Basil should have understood the importance of being informed in a timely manner. Basil began to ask His Majesty to wait. He believed that the master was going to bring Letitia to the palace and deal with her there, and he also did not understand how he alone would drag this wolf. He begged the gentleman to stay, claiming that the gentleman could ask for it out loud himself. The whole request was prompted by his guilt for having delayed the denunciation a little, which, as he said, was terrible. Igor sternly ordered the man not to dawdle and to get down to business immediately. Then he added that after everything was done, he would have to return to the palace. Arundel, the capital of the kingdom, the man attracted attention by reporting terrible news. An epidemic had reached the royal family of Crichton. Many had died, including the crown prince. The disease did not spare any of the royal family who served in the temple. These people died one after another from an unknown but clearly deadly affliction. Fate turned out in such a way that only the heirs to the throne, and those who were in line for the throne, fell victim to the disease. The tragedy was discussed in the Royal Council Hall in Crichton. Among the close associates of the Dowager Queen, there was complete chaos due to the epidemic. It was decided to send a delegation there as soon as possible to officially express condolences on behalf of the kingdom. Igor believed that they wanted to send him to the epicenter of the epidemic. The idea seemed absurd to him. He considered such people simply crazy. The neighboring kingdom was going through a terrible time, but he firmly stated that it was not worth taking thoughtless risks and sending his people there. The anchor noted the strangeness of the situation, and the woman noted that the disease could easily reach their kingdom. Both the master and his faithful assistant found all this extremely suspicious and could not get rid of an uneasy feeling. If the Dowager Queen was behind this, then casualties among her loved ones were inevitable. This development of events alarmed everyone. Igor couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Crichton royal family was completely extinct. The thought was terrifying and incomprehensible. Now, according to all the laws of succession, the only contender for the throne was the Dowager Queen. Suddenly, the queen burst into the room. She, barely breathing from excitement, asked what they should do now. Upon learning of her cousin's death, she fell to her knees, bursting into tears. Servants and courtiers rushed to her aid. Igor ran up to his mother and tried to calm her down, asking her not to worry so much. She grabbed her son by the hand and cried out. How could she not worry if such terrible events were happening on her native land? She added bitterly that even heaven was indifferent to this horror when such innocent souls perished. Igor, despite his worries, tried to bring his mother to her senses, persuading her to pull herself together. But before he could process anything, his mother fainted in his arms. The sight shook him to the core. Without wasting any time, Igor shouted loudly for Basil to immediately call the royal physician. His heart was breaking from the weight of what was happening. He could not understand what it all meant and where it would lead. His thoughts were confused, and he desperately tried to understand what he needed to do at this very moment, to at least make the situation a little easier. Rihanna appeared in the chambers of the Dowager Queen, shaken to the depths of her soul. She could not recover from the shock of recent events. Although the news shocked Her Majesty, Rihanna was relieved to know that her cousins were safe and had escaped a terrible fate. The Queen's maid was very surprised and asked Rihanna again if everything was really like that, and if everything was okay with Dmitri Privius, who had arrived recently. Rihanna confirmed that only direct heirs were allowed to visit the temple, and that this helped to avoid the disease. She was confident that everything would be fine. The woman was glad to hear these words. In her situation, she needed to remain calm to avoid unnecessary worries. The maid promised to take care of the Dowager Queen. She had to return to her chambers to recuperate. She would recover soon, and now it was important to think about the future child. There was no point in worrying about that. All necessary measures have been taken. Now the lady needs to rest. The doctor will soon arrive to help her recover. Rihanna asked for the Queen to be looked after and given permission once she was well. This was important for her recovery. The maid assured her that there was no need to worry because she would stay with the Queen. The doctor would take care of her, and everything would be fine. When everyone had left, the Queen expressed her displeasure. She was really very irritated by this, and she did not hide it. There were no relatives in the temple, and only she as the direct heir remained. This worried her, but she held on. The maid wondered what the Queen would do if Privius chose a king for Crichton. This gave her no peace. The Queen did not want this outcome, but she understood that she would have to fight for her rights and position. She prepared for the fight. The woman began to suspect something, and the Queen quickly told her to prepare everything she asked for further action. Basil heard everything and realized that the Dowager Queen might be behind it. He immediately suspected something more in this situation. He stood behind the door and sensed that things were not so simple. He came with white roses as a sign of sympathy from the council. But now he understood the truth, and he needed to find out all the details. He hurried to His Majesty to find out everything. It all had something to do with what the king was trying to find out. It gave Basil a clue to further investigation. The king was in a separate house and greeted Letica. His meeting with her was important and symbolic at this moment. He explained that he could not do otherwise. The woman understood that it was all for Arendel's sake and agreed with his decision. She hoped that he would make her his queen. The king confidently said that her doubts were groundless and that it would definitely happen. 2 months after the outbreak of the plague, the Council of Crichton called an emergency meeting to discuss the current situation in the kingdom. Privius was held at the meeting. This restored stability and confidence in the future to the kingdom. He became king, and although Privius was weak compared to his father, he had to prove his strength and leadership qualities. His diplomatic work is highly praised, especially the last mission to Arendelle. It's even good his relative became king, so there will be additional support. The young ruler, who was still single, was soon to find a wife and children, which of course would radically change his life and responsibilities. The king, noticing his distraction, told him to stop chattering nonsense and concentrate on business, in particular, to sort out important papers. Basil began to complain as he had just finished his paperwork. However, the king insisted that he go and see the queen immediately. Basil, without hesitation, said that of course we must go, and without any doubt, because the queen deserved attention and respect. However, he noted that it would be strange if he went to the lady empty-handed, which would require additional efforts on his part. Rihanna was sitting reading a book when the king knocked on the door, asking if it would be inconvenient for him to come in and asking for permission. The girl was delighted when she saw her husband. His appearance brought her much joy and made her day even brighter. Igor apologized for interrupting her reading and, kissing her forehead, expressed his regret at having disturbed her occupation. Rihanna replied that nothing terrible had happened because she was just looking for something in her book, and Igor, interested, asked her what it was. Rihanna suggested that perhaps Igor remembers this moment because it was important to her and happened during their first meeting. The girl showed him the feather that had fallen from the divine bird, and this became an important milestone in their relationship and memories. Igor watched with pleasure as his wife smiled at the feather. He was glad that this moment left such a pleasant memory. She asked if she had made a wish the moment Igor handed her the feather, believing that this moment was not entirely ordinary. Rihanna replied that in fact she didn't make any wish because the miracle had already happened. Everything she dreamed of came true. Then Igor realized that if the queen was not greedy, then let this wish go to their future child as a sign of their love and care. Then they heard a crash. It was Basil who rushed in and informed Her Majesty that letters of congratulation and gifts from the royal family of Crichton had arrived. Fine jewelry, magnificent headdresses, and clothing made from Crichton's most expensive materials. There were also toys for the baby. These were the rarest treasures brought from the Northern Islands, real jewels that could cause admiration. Also donated were animals and fresh fruits from the Southern Islands, which had a special taste and bright colors. No one could have guessed that the gifts would be unsuccessful, because Crichton is a maritime power, and such gifts would be enough to fill an entire palace. The king was furious, his irritation leading him to shout at Basil, unable to hide his anger. However, the man asked for her attention, saying that he had a special gift for her from King Crichton. He asked that she open it in secret, from everyone assuring that she would understand everything immediately. He repeated his request to open the gift in private more than once, and the queen, hearing this, nodded with understanding, confirming that she understood everything. Basil turned to His Highness, informing him that they should go to the office immediately. Count Clovis was dead. The king was perplexed, not understanding how it could happen that the count died so suddenly, and thought that it would be more correct to simply announce the death. Although he found it hard to believe, the king decided that it would still be more correct to say that the count had actually died without knowing how to cope with it. In connection with this, he informed Rihanna that he would no longer be able to visit her as often because he had a lot of things to do that needed to be resolved immediately. He hoped that she would wait for his return, and the girl promised with a smile that she would wait for him as before. She asked that His Majesty return as soon as possible, expressing hope for a quick meeting. Igor now understands that this means that after Crichton, it will be their country's turn. Basil noted that His Majesty speaks too loudly. Someone might hear it. It all happened during a very difficult and critical period when the queen was pregnant. But it was still too early to say that an epidemic was beginning in their circle. Basil reported that none of the Earl's close associates showed any symptoms of the disease. Lady Letitia had been with him until his death and was doing well. The second turned to him and asked doubtfully if Lady Letitia was really with him. He needed confirmation of this. Basil admitted that he couldn't say for sure, but most likely she had a secret meeting with the Count that no one knew about. It is very interesting that the Dowager Queen tried to arrange a meeting between Letitia and the Count to find out something. When her plan failed, the Count's mother spread a dirty rumor, which calmed her soul a little. This move brought her relief. The king could not believe what had happened. Basil noted that if the Count had become king, Letitia could have become queen. He realized that this conversation needed to be ended urgently, covered up with other rumors in order to avoid further complications. If the rumors were true, it could lead to a real nightmare for everyone. The conflict would escalate much more. Basil exclaimed towards His Majesty, wondering why he had suddenly stopped in thought and not continued moving. Lady Letitia suddenly appeared before His Majesty, and her presence caused surprise among all who were nearby. He was proven right when he realized that the Dowager Queen had sent Letitia personally to deliver an important message to His Majesty. Lady Letitia asked in surprise what this object was, and was told that it was a poison that had been manufactured in the Toulouse Empire. The poison was deadly. It was enough to add a little of it to wine or drink, and it would remain invisible but deadly. The poison had neither color nor odor, and penetrated the body, slowly causing death, as if the person died from a disease. Its effect was such that a person who died from this poison seemed to be a victim of a contagious disease and not of poisoning. Lady Letitia was told that she was to use it at the right moment when she could find her place in this cruel game. Lady Letitia immediately rushed to the king, confident that he would return to her and she would be able to be near him again. The king himself was to blame for this, but it was as if he had been slandered, and it was hard for him to bear such accusations and suspicions. He couldn't believe that he had to take such measures to get rid of his mother and her influence on the kingdom. Rihanna was shocked when her cousin told her to open something when she was alone. She didn't know what to expect. She became incredibly curious about what was hidden inside, and opening it a little, she immediately realized that it was something important. When Dmitri was 9 years old, he showed her beautiful models of sailboats, dreaming of sea voyages and adventures. But Rihanna didn't quite understand what a sailboat was when she was just 7 years old, so it was hard for her to appreciate the significance. Dmitri explained that this is a special ship that can easily cross any sea and travel to any point in the world. He dreamed of one day going on a long journey on a sailing ship and traveling around the world to see unexplored corners of the planet. Rihanna was upset and said that she wanted to swim with him too, because she couldn't imagine her life without him. But Dmitri said that she was still too young, and before going on such trips, she needed to grow up a little. Rihanna insisted that she was old enough and that she was ready to hit the road right now despite objections. Dmitri didn't want to upset his sister, so he gave her a sailboat so she could play and forget about her dreams for a while. Over time, they both grew up, and Dmitri fulfilled Rihanna's dream by giving her the opportunity to travel. She was delighted about it. She remembered how, at one banquet, the king had said that they needed to develop sea trade routes for the country's prosperity. The sailboat that made Dima's dream come true. She decided to put a feather in this box if her husband had one. Then her dream would have come true too. The king asked Basil not to let anyone in, just a few guards. The woman was simply delighted by this. The king simply looked at her angrily. He noted that it seemed they needed to discuss some things. The king was outraged by the girl's behavior and declared that she had committed an extremely unworthy act. He could not believe her behavior. Not only did she spread rumors that she would become his wife, but she also perjured herself by claiming that they had had intimate relations on several occasions. However, this never happened, and the king, feeling insulted, grabbed her hand, asking if she really wanted to become queen so much. He grabbed her hands tightly, deciding to ask if this was her own desire or if someone was pushing her to do these things. Igor didn't want to act too harshly, but in his opinion, it was better than torturing her to get an answer to his questions. The girl couldn't understand what was happening and was completely confused. She didn't realize how she had ended up in this situation. Igor immediately gave a signal to his subordinate Basil. He immediately hurried to the exit because it was necessary to block all possible routes. The first step was to contact the captain of the guard. It was Lady Letitia, known for her determination and loyalty. The queen was greatly surprised when she learned that Lady Letitia was nearby. Her maid reported that the lady was in the king's study. Despite this, the queen decided to fulfill her promise. She felt sorry for her son, but was forced to reward the girl for killing the count. The woman asked why her mistress had decided that Lady Letitia should deal with Count Clovis. The maid was puzzled. The queen explained that her father had long ago lost a large sum of money to the count, and there was no other way out but to solve the problem with Letitia's help. The maid expressed doubt, thinking that it could be dangerous to get involved with such a girl, especially with her relationship with the king. The queen agreed with the concerns, but stressed that Letizia had rid her of her worst enemy. She had been far more useful than Rihanna. The queen understood that Letizia was acting out of personal interests and was ready to take advantage of this for her own purposes. At this time, the king noticed that the girl was smiling and began to suspect that she had finally lost her mind. He threw her down on the couch abruptly, realizing that she was extremely angry and disappointed in his actions. Igor asked who she thought he was feeling that her behavior was beyond the pales. Then he turned to her again, deciding that he needed to ask her again to see who she took him for. He demanded an honest answer. The girl blushed, realizing that she had no choice, and declared that he was her king and only hers. She was shocked by her words, but still said that she understood that she needed to admit her mistake and tell the truth. The lady was ready to tell everything as she promised, because the time had come to reveal all the secrets and explain her actions. He asked her why she tried to kill the count and was sure that her attempts were successful since his victim was already dead. The woman said that she did it because of him, and Igor was simply horrified by this. The king had no idea what was happening when the girl began to press him to her with her legs, causing him confusion. Letizia noticed that he really loved her and came to the conclusion that there was no point in continuing the relationship between him and Rihanna. The king felt confused and could not understand what was going on in the head of this crazy woman. Everything was happening too fast and strangely. Mr. Igor shouted in despair that Basil should under no circumstances let anyone into the room without knowing what was going on behind the door. Then he noticed that the boat had fallen, and his wife was standing behind the door, as if she had accidentally ended up there at the most inopportune moment. Igor was completely horrified when he saw his wife in such a situation, not knowing how to explain to her what was happening. Rihanna stood there in tears, unsure of how to react to what was happening. Her mind was in complete disarray. Letizia asked with obvious pride if Rihanna had come specifically to interfere with her and the king. The king shouted at Letizia, but his wife simply turned around and began to walk away, ignoring his calls. He tried to stop her, but at that moment, Letitia grabbed him, not allowing him to move. The king, having decided to catch up with his wife, hurried after her, and Letitia remained pleased with herself, sitting with a grin on her face and enjoying the situation. Igor understood that he had to clear up the misunderstanding as quickly as possible so that the situation did not get out of control. Things were just starting to get better between him and his wife, but the girl quickly ran away from him, not wanting to listen. Letitia herself did not understand why she acted this way, why she ran away, but Igor did not give up trying to stop her. Rihanna was completely confused, not understanding why her husband ended up with Letitia. She could not understand his actions. She remembered her mother crying and begging her husband not to leave her, and it made her heart ache. A moment came to her mind during her mother's funeral, when she was very sad and hurt, and she felt a deep loss. Then, a new sister came to their house, and her father introduced her to Rihanna, creating even more confusion in her life. Letitia didn't consider her an older sister. She only regretted that she couldn't stop crying, considering her weak and helpless. His father would always yell at her, asking if she wished her older sister could be as strong as she was. She remembered the words of Queen Gavrilov, confident that she could cope if she became queen and would take care of her sister. Igor warned that she should think seriously about whether she was fit to be queen before making a final decision. After the wedding, she realized that she had no choice, and her feelings were far from her desire. Everything happened against her will. Finally, the girl stopped, already tired from the long run, feeling that she needed to rest and come to her senses. At that moment, Rihanna couldn't figure out what was heavier, her heart, which was breaking with pain, or the feelings she couldn't control. She didn't feel responsible for the decision she made. Once she reached the light, life stopped putting pressure. Maybe she didn't want to fight anymore. In the bright sun, after she stopped, Rihanna realized how dark her life had been. This realization became a turning point, and she decided to do something about it. She no longer wanted to run from her past, which led to her passing out, unable to cope with her emotions. The king couldn't believe what was happening. There were tears in his eyes, and his cries were from pain and despair. He didn't understand what had happened. The whole next moment was like a fog in her mind, and she only made out a voice calling her name, as if from afar. Mary stood next to her quietly, telling her to wake up, because they were almost there, and Rihanna needed to be ready for the next stage of the journey. She asked if it was really Mary speaking to her, and the girl confidently confirmed that it was she, as always nearby, ready to help. The maid noticed that Rihanna was obviously very tired from the journey, and the girl in turn became interested in how much time had passed since their departure. Mary replied that they had been driving for about 2 hours, and suggested that Rihanna look out the window to see the changing scenery. The girl was delighted because she could hardly wait for the end of the journey, knowing that the long-awaited arrival at the destination was waiting for them ahead. Mary looked at Rihanna and noted that she now looked like a child again, which was noticeably different from her mature actions before. Rihanna once asked if she would go to Crichton with her, and now her look is very different from what it was before. Rihanna no longer looked like a child. Her eyes expressed maturity and understanding that she was making important decisions in her life. She began to act like an adult, confidently communicating with the butler, which surprised those around her with her serious approach. The butler was shocked by her decision to go to Crichton. Rihanna explained that it was unexpected for everyone, but she hoped for his understanding. He guessed that she had made this decision for a reason, and he believed that Crichton would be a safe place where her relatives could protect her. Rihanna was grateful for his support and understanding, glad that he was helping her, and that he shared her desire to fight back against her father. The man replied that he did not deserve gratitude since he considered it his duty and was always there when her support was needed. Rihanna believed that the Count was the one most responsible for everything, and that is why she asked the man to take care of this house. He didn't quite understand what exactly she meant, but he felt that he needed to take her request seriously and act according to the situation. Rihanna clarified that she was handing over all authority and asked to send reports on the condition of the house at least once a month so that everything was under control. The man was stunned by her words and could not understand how he could cope with such a task because the responsibility was enormous. Nevertheless, he agreed to take on this responsibility, promising that he would take care of the house, even if he did not consider himself worthy of such trust. Rihanna asked him not to say that, because everyone in the house knew that he was a very capable and responsible person who could be trusted. Mary, supporting her, added that she could of course attest to his abilities, since she had seen how much he had already done for them. They all felt uneasy because events were moving very quickly, and it was difficult to believe the changes that were happening in their lives. Using the memory of her past life, Rihanna left instructions to her butler Jeffrey on how to manage the estate and other property. She said that she would leave it here. The lands of the estate were barren and rocky, and the trade route was far away, so there was no point in counting on it. The gentleman was engrossed in studying his thoughts, figuring out what would be more profitable to sell. The girl watching him immediately understood what was being discussed. Her insight allowed her to easily read other people's intentions. But the girl had her own ideas about the situation. She confidently insisted that he should listen to her plan, as it would ensure the best outcome. Even before Rihanna appeared on Earth, a deposit of the Ark gemstone was discovered in the estate belonging to the Earl. This discovery became a key event that predetermined the future fate of the family. Ark stones had a unique ability to store large amounts of magical energy and light, which made them incredibly popular in a variety of fields. This valuable mineral opened the way to wealth for the Count's family. The trade in Ark stones brought in an impressive income, which allowed the Count to take an important place in the political arena. Thanks to his success, the Count was able to openly oppose the regency of the Dowager Queen. However, despite this, the girl decided to leave the lands with the deposits in reserve as a strategic asset. Rihanna's rapid maturation became inevitable. Watching her, Mary could not hide her pity, realizing how hard it was for the girl to face the reality of life. However, she was sure that Rihanna would find happiness in Crichton. The thought of this gave her hope and faith in the bright future of her mistress. Mary carefully took Gazprom in her hand, noting that it was too dangerous to go down alone, and offered to help. Mary's concern warmed Rihanna's heart. Rihanna was fascinated by the upcoming journey, sincerely believing that the ship would take her to Crichton. Her expectations were filled with joy and anticipation of change. Finally, word came that the ship to Crichton was about to board. This moment was an important step toward her new life. Tickets were checked at the entrance. The man, noticing the name of Count Alison's daughter, was shocked. It was hard for him to believe that such a high-ranking person was going on this ship. Mary confirmed that it was indeed Countess Rihanna in front of him, Alison. Her confidence and calmness made an impression. The man finally realized the importance of the situation and quickly called the captain. He also asked to wait, causing slight confusion among the mistress and her maid. The captain himself finally approached and greeted the countess with respect. His manners betrayed a man accustomed to dealing with aristocrats. The captain explained that he had been looking forward to her arrival since learning of her intention to sail on this ship. His words were sincere and respectful. The lady expressed her pleasure at meeting her, and the captain shared his surprise that the aristocrat was traveling on an ordinary ship and not renting it entirely. Rihanna explained that she wanted to get to Crichton as soon as possible, which made the captain admire her determination and choice. He noted that her decision to go on this particular ship was correct, since it is fast and safe, which makes it ideal for such a journey. The captain offered a tour of the ship, telling her that it was considered the best among passenger ships. His sincerity was endearing. At that moment, Rihanna realized that she was really leaving. It was a big step, and she felt grateful for the care she had received. She firmly decided that this was not an escape, but a conscious choice of a new life. This realization gave her strength and confidence. The captain led her to a cabin that turned out to be the most comfortable on the entire ship. Here she felt important and protected. He assured her that she could always ask for help if she needed anything and stressed that her comfort was their priority. The captain sincerely hoped that the Countess would enjoy the journey. His attention to detail made the trip even more enjoyable. For Rihanna, it was something special. A hotel in the middle of the endless sea. Mary, looking at it with delight, was even more excited than her mistress. Mary had never traveled on such a large ship before. She was amazed by its size, its exquisite decoration, and its grandeur. Everything around her seemed like something from another world, especially after many years spent in humble surroundings. Mary could not hide her delight, and wanting to share the joy, invited the lady to go up to the upper deck. She was sure that the view from above would not leave Rihanna indifferent, and would become a special moment of their trip. Rihanna readily agreed, and they went up on deck. There a truly amazing picture opened up. The endless sea shimmered in the sun, a light breeze gently blew on her face, and an atmosphere of calm and grandeur reigned all around. On the bow of the ship, they noticed a figurehead they had seen before on other ships. Its refined form and overall appearance were clearly designed to delight all who stepped aboard. These figures always looked the same, like symbols of something eternal. Rihanna drew Mary's attention to the statue's wings, noticing that they were unusually smooth and shiny. They looked like they had been touched often. The lady's gaze was focused on them, as if she was looking for something more in this sign than just the skillful execution. Mary's maid came closer and touched the wings, noticing how pleasant their texture was. She agreed with her mistress that the shine of the surface indicated how many people had touched them, apparently believing in some kind of secret power. Touching these wings was believed to ensure a safe voyage. Mary suggested that perhaps they, too, should follow the example of others to ensure a trouble-free journey. However, due to her small stature, the girl was unable to reach the wings. She stood on tiptoe, but even so, the distance was still too great. Her face showed slight disappointment. Rihanna, noticing this, decided to help a little. Having risen even higher, she reached for the wings and suggested that Mary do the same. At that moment, their faces lit up with slight excitement and joy. Mary, with a little effort, touched the wings too, and they both laughed. The moment seemed to unite them even more, adding lightness and fun to their journey. Mary then suggested that the statue might be a mermaid. However, Rihanna reminded her that a mermaid should have a tail, and there was none, which led to more speculation. They began to discuss that it was probably an angel since it had wings. Their animated conversation attracted the attention of one of the workers, who could not help but smile at their reasoning. The man laughingly explained that it was neither a mermaid nor an angel, but a figure called an atraxia. It, he said symbolically, protected the ship and ensured its safety. The girls were surprised and a little puzzled by what they heard. Mary, full of doubts, asked again if this was really so. The man confirmed, adding that the ship itself was called Atraxia. He was surprised that they did not know about this, although the legend was widely known. He also said that touching the Atraxia was believed to ensure a ship's safe return to Arendelle. This custom was popular among sailors and passengers who believed in the power of the symbol. Rihanna asked curiously, what would happen if she didn't plan to return to Arendelle? Her words sounded slightly cheeky, but there was genuine curiosity in them. The man, smiling, noticed that the girls seemed to doubt his words. However, at that moment, another worker called him over, and he was forced to leave them in their reverie. He said that they would see how the ships with the figure of the attraction are very strong and able to withstand any tests. These structures will become a real miracle that they can be proud of. Rihanna went to the mayor's office with a request saying that she was feeling cold and needed warmth. She asked the maid to bring her a shawl from her cabin as she was feeling uncomfortable. The maid responded by saying that she would have to wait a few seconds to fulfill the request. She was sure that she would return soon with the necessary item, and Rihanna would not be left in the cold. The woman immediately headed to the cabin, and the girl meanwhile took a feather out of her sleeve. She thought about what would happen next, and how this feather was connected to her feelings. The girl couldn't understand why such a strong connection with the attraction was necessary, especially considering that this connection led to such a tragic end. She continued to think about it without finding an answer. Reluctantly, she threw the feather into the ocean, and immediately a small glowing splash appeared on the water. It was strange, but at the same time, it somehow calmed her inner torment. At this time, the maid returned and said that she had brought a shawl for Rihanna. She tried to fulfill her duty as quickly as possible without keeping her mistress waiting for long. The maid immediately began asking Rihanna if she was too cold, as she noticed that the girl's eyes were red. Her concern was obvious. She wanted to make sure that Rihanna was okay. Rihanna replied that her eyes were red because of the wind, and added that it was a mistake to send the maid for the shawl. She thought she could have handled it herself, and it was an unnecessary worry. She suggested that they return to the cabin, but the maid did not agree. She believed that she should be careful and not allow herself to freeze, as illness could cause trouble. The girl noticed that there was some kind of commotion outside the window. She heard them discussing something about a delay, and she became curious about what was going on. What was the cause of this disturbance? She also heard a conversation about the ship being stopped. Rihanna, worried, asked the maid what was wrong, as she could not understand why everyone was so worried. Mary reported that the reason for the commotion was that someone was making a scene because they were not allowed on the ship. This caused a storm of emotions among everyone, and the situation became tense. Everyone present was horrified. They could not understand what exactly this boy was doing and what he wanted, because his behavior seemed completely inexplicable and inappropriate. He continued to shout loudly, demanding that they stop the ship immediately. The men were shocked that anyone would even think of stopping a ship that had already set sail. In response, they began calling for the guards to intervene and resolve the situation. The guy continued to shout, demanding that the ship be returned to port as quickly as possible, not understanding the absurdity of what was happening. Igor stood and watched attentively as the ship slowly sailed away, feeling anxiety creeping up on him. Someone was constantly calling him, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from what was happening on the water. Finally, Igor couldn't take it anymore and shouted loudly that he could hear everything and that he wasn't deaf. His voice echoed through the air, and despite his words, those around him did not calm down. Basil was desperately saying that the master had to do something because they could all be killed at this moment. Her anxiety was understandable. The situation was becoming more and more dangerous. A crowd of men stood over Igor, and at that moment their horse tore. The sack stepped on one of the feet, and the men began to ignore the guards' demands. The atmosphere was heating up. Igor, without thinking, threw the money towards the men and ordered Basil to convey an apology and also to pay their demands. He knew that he had to act quickly to avoid serious consequences. Basil, full of dreadful forebodings, nervously asked if the gentleman thought that this money would be enough to calm the aggressive men. She very much doubted it. The men noticed that their little master would grow up, and their attitude towards him would change. They believed that in the future, when he became an adult, money could really matter. One of the men, who seemed particularly annoyed, quietly said that the guy was just a bum. They decided that after a glass of wine, their anger might subside, and then the situation would become less tense. Basil begged the gentleman to somehow save him, but Igor, not wanting to interfere any further, simply turned and walked away. He knew he couldn't stay in this place for long. Finally, the man standing next to him said that he would sort out all the issues and return later. Igor could not remember how many days he spent on the road on his horse. When Igor woke up, his past regrets and his life that was starting anew hit him to the core. He felt that much had changed, and it overwhelmed him. Immediately after waking up, Igor went to Rihanna's estate to make sure she was safe and out of danger. His heart was beating anxiously, and he wanted to be close. However, upon arrival, he learned that Rihanna had already left for Crichton. Igor had missed her again, and this thought filled his mind, making him feel completely helpless. He was absolutely sure that keeping her in such a position would be immoral and unconscionable, but at the same time, he understood perfectly well that this could be the only chance he received thanks to Atraxia. However, despite all his doubts, he could not pass up this opportunity Atraxia had given him, a chance that could change everything. He knew that if he did not take it now, he might not get another chance like this. 6 years passed, and the capital of Arundel Edern once again became the site of major events. Time passed, but the problems remained as acute. The political situation did not become easier. But on the contrary, it only worsened. The man asked for attention, and all eyes instantly turned to him. He was a spy from Crichton, which surprised everyone, as such an incident had not happened for a long time. Everyone found it hard to believe that this could be true. This spy came from Crichton, with the purpose of poisoning the royal family. He tried to carry out his mission, but was detained. This was a real shock to everyone, especially to those who knew about his real intentions. He was sentenced to death by royal decree. The entire justice system was geared to carry out this sentence. The man had no chance of salvation despite his past merits. The order was strictly carried out. At the end, before his death, everyone humiliated him, and the crowd shouted, "Glory to Arundel." This became part of the demonstration of the power of the authorities and their ruthlessness towards their enemies. The queen was simply horrified by what was happening because Eager, her son, personally executed a man from the high society of Crichton. This caused a strong shock, since she could not expect such a thing from her own child. It seemed that Igor had decided to start a war with his former allies. It was a dangerous and risky decision. However, despite all her attempts, he no longer listened to her advice or took her words seriously. Igor realized that there was nothing he could do about this war. It wanted it, and now he couldn't stop what had already begun. All he could do was continue to move forward and follow his path, regardless of the consequences. The woman was in complete shock and did not understand what her son was talking about. She could not believe that he was so determined. All her attempts to justify herself and explain her actions did not bring any results. Igor, without wasting time, called his chamberlain. He immediately presented him with a book that could shed light on all the events that had taken place. Igor was determined he needed to figure out what his mother was hiding. The woman could not understand how he had managed to figure out what was happening so quickly. Her thoughts were confused, and she could not explain how her son could so accurately see all her steps and understand what was hidden behind her actions. The games quickly realized that she wasn't even trying to pretend she didn't know anything. She wasn't trying to hide her actions, but Igor already knew everything. It was part of her strategy, although she didn't expect it to be revealed like that. In reality, they executed a spy, who on her orders was to go to Crichton to poison the royal family. This move was part of her complex game, but she underestimated the consequences of her plan. Igor noticed that his mother still had iodine hidden in her secret safe. He was sure that this was part of her hidden intentions, that she was preparing something important, but hiding it from everyone, even from him. Mother tried to explain to Igor that she did all this for him, that her actions were aimed at his well-being. However, Igor no longer believed her excuses. He shouted that he was tired of her cowardly attempts to justify her actions. This only confirmed that she turned a blind eye to the aristocrats' tax evasion. She accepted bribes, used them for her own needs, which clearly violated the law and undermined confidence in her rule. The bribes she received were used for military expenses. That was her secret goal. But Igor was ready to expose her, realizing that his mother used them to expand her powers, and not for the security of the state. He asked why the king did not know about such expenses. The woman began to scream, trying to justify herself that Igor had misunderstood her actions, that she was forced to do all this for the sake of the stability of the kingdom. She tried to convince Igor that now that he was on the throne, she had no reason to take bribes, that it was all a lie. But her words had no power against his accusations, and she understood that her power was at an end. Igor firmly declared that from that moment on, all the power and finances of the Dowager Queen would pass to him. He became King of Arundel, and now all the power belonged to him, and her influence on politics no longer mattered. Igor orders the Dowager Queen to be imprisoned in the Northern Palace. This was a move to deprive her of any influence on the political situation and prevent her from interacting with the aristocracy. Now she will not be able to influence the policy of Arundel. At the age of 17, Igor deprived his mother of power and created his own government, which was not subject to her influence and control. Some time later, Crichton's ship appeared in the waters of Arundel. This was a clear warning of the beginning of the war, which was now inevitable. The capital of the Crichton Tarsus, the estate of the Marquis Privius. Here in the luxurious halls and gardens was a huge family, among whom many stood out. But this time, the attention was drawn to the servant. The maid approaching the assembled company warned them to be ready. A moment later, she tossed the ball, which immediately went into play, and the other maids eagerly waited for the action to begin. Soon other maids joined in the game. They vigorously twirled their clubs, creating a real whirlwind around them, as if in a dance, and almost fought for the right to catch the ball. Rihanna shouted loudly for Mary to throw the ball to her. She was ready and confident, expecting a quick and accurate pass that would instantly put the game in her hands. Mary managed to catch the ball and immediately shouted that now it was time to run. The team was ready for action, and everyone was watching with anticipation what would happen next. Watching her reactions, the maid quickly threw the ball to Rihanna, shouting at her to return it without losing her momentum. The situation was becoming increasingly tense, as every move was important to finish the game. Rihanna skillfully returned the ball. The precision and dexterity of her movements surprised all the maids. Each was delighted with how she coped with this difficult task. The whole room was filled with applause. Because it was truly magnificent, Rihanna not only hit the ball, but also demonstrated true skill for which everyone around her praised her. Dima, who was standing aside, was very happy to see his cousin. He even joked that today, Rihanna showed everyone again that she was the best, and laughed with joy for her success. Rihanna, looking at Dima, said that it would be better if he stopped laughing. They decided to continue in silence, concentrating on what was ahead. Dima, smiling, noted that this sport would make her a real strong woman. He joked that she would become so strong that she would be able to catch a bear, and therefore they could go hunting. However, Rihanna responded that she had to give up on the idea. She didn't want to look at the blood, and her father, hearing this, asked Dima to stop making jokes about it. Dima, of course, forgot that Rihanna had experienced a strong shock when she saw a dead bear as a child. He thought that she was giving up hunting, remembering his first bear hunt. Remembering their childhood, they began to laugh when they remembered how their father and Dima dragged the bear. Mary, noticing that Rihanna looked worried, tried to bring her to her senses. When Rihanna saw them carrying the bear, she thought the animal was still alive and had managed to get into the house. This sight really shocked her, although she later calmed down. She was now much healthier than before and did not faint from fear. Her health had improved significantly, and she could now confidently handle such situations. Dima, however, noted that she should be more careful because he remembered how ill she had been when she arrived from Arundel. He did not want her to experience difficult moments again. Rihanna, looking at him, said with a smile that he seemed to still consider her a 12-year-old child. Dima, however, noted that, for him, she was still a little girl. Father, deciding to bring his own topic into the conversation, wanted to know what Dima thought about a possible war with Arundel. This was an important event, and his opinion was significant for everyone. Dima, after thinking, said that they could well win. But he admitted that one should not underestimate the enemy, because they also have a chance to win, and the fight will not be easy. The father, having listened to him, noted that he did not understand why Dima was so sure. His doubts were apparently connected with many unknown circumstances of this war. A war broke out between the two countries, like never before in Rihanna's life. The conflict with Arundel was far more serious than any other conflict she had ever known. My father stressed that if Arundel's advance could not be repelled, the consequences would be catastrophic. He was determined as the situation became increasingly tense. Dima added that the king had been successfully developing shipping for many years. This was important, since with its help, he could strengthen his position and prepare the fleet for possible defense. He also noted that Lexington alone provided vast supplies of timber and shipbuilding materials. However, the fleet was still vulnerable, as they had no experience of fighting in the waters of Arundel. If the king of Arundel is prepared, they will not win. These states have united to jointly confront the threats from Toulouse. The more strained the relationship between the two countries is, the more the empire will gain. In the end, there will be no benefit for them from the war, so they will not start it. Once in the middle of things, it turned out that Crichton was trying to interfere in Arundel's internal affairs, which could have far-reaching consequences for both states and their relations. In response, a Crichton aristocrat who was working as a spy was executed in Arundel, a move that led to tensions between the countries and became the impetus for the outbreak of war. During this time, Igor probably managed to consolidate his power and position. He continued to strive to make his influence in the region more significant, despite external threats. Igor dreamed of building a strong navy in Arendelle to make the country a maritime power. However, Arendelle ultimately decided that it should not be distracted from other more pressing problems. Dima turned to the girl, noticing that something was wrong with her. He decided to find out what had happened and was concerned about her condition, as she looked tired and somewhat absent-minded. He thought the girl was probably going through a hard time, and he didn't rule out the possibility that she might have been playing too hard with the maids and not noticing how tired she was. Having already noticed her fatigue, Dima assumed that she was very overexerted and needed to rest. He watched her condition with concern, seeing how her eyes were weakly opening. The girl, realizing that she really needed to rest, agreed with him. She decided that it would be better to leave to get some sleep and said goodbye to Dima, expressing gratitude for his concern. She assured everyone that she was fine and there was no need to worry. She really needed some rest, and she wished everyone a good night, confident that everything would be fine soon. The father noticed that she seemed to care about him and smiled back, wishing her good night. He was touched by her attention, even in spite of her tiredness. Walking along the dark road, the girl thought that, at this time, her companion could also be walking alone like her. This thought did not leave her, but she continued to move forward. At some point, she closed her eyes and began to remember what Igor looked like, his face and behavior. The memories of this were vivid, but she tried to distract herself from them. Realizing that she shouldn't keep thinking about him, she decided to stop these thoughts. She needed to get rid of the memories and focus on the present, not the past. The girl tried to convince herself that her feelings for Igor were not true love. She decided not to dwell on the past and move forward despite the emotions she had experienced. She shouldn't even miss those days because she had chosen this path herself. Understanding this helped her look to the future and not let past experiences hold her back. She was lost in her thoughts, so caught up in them that she didn't notice someone approaching. The girl was absorbed in her own world, which made her vulnerable to what was happening around her. The girl, still lost in her thoughts, noticed that she was still in the clouds, not paying attention to what was happening around her. She continued to walk forward, absorbed in her thoughts. The girl asked if she was going to choose a future groom from among those present, which immediately attracted the attention of everyone nearby, watching the princess's reaction. It was Helena Crichton, not only a princess, but also a member of a noble family. Rihanna noted that she probably would not find a suitable cavalier among this circle. The princess thought about how to resolve the difficult situation they had created themselves, discussing the recent incident that had disrupted the usual order of their communication. At this point, the servants began to argue and fight among themselves, unable to agree on who should release the ball first. Their actions became increasingly intense, creating an atmosphere of chaos. The fight between the servants for this unfortunate ball became so intense, as if it were their last attempt in life to win. Their struggle was frantic and full of determination. The princess didn't keep track of what was happening, preferring not to interfere. But Rihanna noticed how some of the participants were still giving it their all, despite the lack of need. An hour ago in the royal garden, everyone greeted Princess Helena with joy, adding elegance and grandeur to the atmosphere where her presence attracted everyone's attention. Her beauty continued to shine like a bright beacon in this chaos, creating around her an aura of grandeur so characteristic of military men who, despite everything, remained true to their ideals. The princess modestly noted that all this praise was too high for her, and she hardly deserved such attention, which of course could not go unnoticed by those around her. She expressed her opinion by claiming that it is not her looks that really shines, but her courage and determination to fight for her country, which is something that everyone around her should remember. The lady was indeed right in her statement, but at the same time, someone close to her was worried, believing that one of those close to the princess did not have sufficient connections with Crichton. The princess believed that this girl would take a worthy place in her heart, which was so sincerely attached to their country, but she herself did not even suspect that Duke Rurik was so worried about her. At that moment, the princess wanted to share her thoughts, but Rihanna tried to stop her in a whisper, warning her against excessive revelations, but the princess insisted that she not interfere. The princess asked the duke to demonstrate his care and strength through participation in the game, believing that only actions can show true intentions, not empty words. After the fight was over, the man asked where the ball that was so important to everyone ended up, and its disappearance became a mystery that was worth solving. The princess, with fury in her voice, announced that the object of her intentions was in her hands and that she would definitely throw it. She advised the man to be ready and catch it. The duke said with a smile that she could throw it with confidence because she was doing this action only for his sake, and he in turn was very pleased with this and proud of his daughter. However, instead of handing it over neatly, the princess threw the object with the club right into the man's face, causing laughter among those present. Rihanna, noticing what was happening, tried to intervene and asked the princess to stop her behavior, expressing concern about the girl's actions. The princess did not understand why her request should be taken seriously. She found what was happening amusing and saw no reason to stop. The woman was perplexed because she could not understand why the princess treated a man who did not deserve such treatment. When Helena saw her governess, her face lit up with joy, and she hurried over to ask her a few questions about raising children. Helena showed interest in how the governess managed to raise the children in such a way that they grew up so willful and wayward. The princess asked in surprise why everyone was reacting so violently to her usual game, noting that she was the one who initiated all this fun. She couldn't help but ask the maids why they were so upset, since they were supposed to provide support and assistance to the man. The princess also asked the girl to follow her, perhaps to discuss further events, or simply to continue the conversation. Lady Rihanna was also invited, and all she had to do was get up and go into the house. The work in the house began, and the maids began to find out how the duke was feeling, who looked angrily at the girls. The aristocrats who were watching the situation were delighted with the girl, a mixture of different nationalities, who had aroused their interest. Meanwhile, they watched what was happening with curiosity, knowing that in Helena's chambers, the girl decided to rest, a little tired of all the excitement. The girl thought that she would not be able to withstand 2 hours of instructions from the governess, but she still hoped that they would soon end. Rihanna, oddly enough, noted that they were incredibly lucky that the governess had finally completed her lengthy instructions. She added that if the situation had been more serious, the woman would certainly have continued her moralizing without stopping there. The princess remembered that the game was her idea and understood that she had decided to take revenge on Rurik in this way, putting on a whole performance. So she decided to ask Rihanna why the girl asked her to stop playing, because it was not obvious to the princess. Rihanna responded to this by saying that her heritage is indeed mixed, but it does not offend her despite the rumors circulating around. Rihanna, despite everything, confirmed that she too is a part of Crichton, and that her attitude towards Arundel was much more negative than towards the others. She added that this was precisely why she ignored the Duke's words, because their meaning to her was insignificant in the context of what was happening. According to her, everything will change when the war ends, and then they will no longer lose a single naval battle, but victory will be theirs. Rihanna was confident that next time their army would also be victorious, despite all the difficulties they faced. Helena Crichton was a truly majestic figure. Her beauty and ability to conquer hearts were obvious to everyone, and she was highly respected. As a child, many young aristocrats sought to befriend her, but soon refused, as they could not stand her excessive demands and high standards. The princess once stated that she did not want to communicate with stupid girls, which caused resentment among those who tried to establish relationships with her. The princess's only friend was Rihanna, a peer who had a high aristocratic status and was able to withstand the princess's demands and behavioral peculiarities. Despite the fact that Rihanna and her companion were the same age, Rihanna looked a little taller. Her height was more noticeable. Despite their similar age, their appearances were different, and this contrast was obvious. When they first met, Rihanna immediately noticed that the girl looked like a shiny chick, with her fair skin and bright hair. The appearance of the new acquaintance attracted attention with its unusualness. Rihanna's appearance said that she was tall, and her face was really beautiful, which made her ideal to be around and keep her company in any business that she had to undertake. The princess decided to test Rihanna to check how she would behave in a difficult situation and how quickly she would be ready to adapt to new conditions, including from the point of view of their possible friendship. When Helena accidentally pulled the brush too tight, Rihanna immediately thought that perhaps the princess wanted her to brush her hair, seeing it as a hidden request in her gesture. Helena noted that if Rihanna really wanted to be her friend, she needed to learn how to do simple tasks, like brushing her hair, which was an important part of building a trusting relationship. The princess wanted to test how well Rihanna would cope with this task and decide whether it was worth continuing to develop the relationship or whether her companion was still not ready for such a role. 3 minutes later, Rihanna still did not understand what was happening. The princess leaned back in her chair and enjoyed the moment with a cup of aromatic cocoa. There were no signs of excitement in her behavior, as if she had completely relaxed and surrendered to the sensations of the cozy environment. Becoming a friend of the princess was an important step in Rihanna's life. She had been feeling lonely since escaping from Arundel, and now she could perhaps find support and comfort in Helena. Rihanna was finally heading home, despite the fact that the princess's whims were constantly postponing her departure. All these delays began to irritate her, but she hoped that soon everything would end and she would return to her home. Helena was very upset that Rihanna could not simply stay with her in the palace. Her affection for the girl was obvious, and the thought of leaving her greatly upset the princess. Memories from the past haunted Rihanna. She wondered if she needed to leave every time, or if there was something important hidden in her house that she had not yet realized, and that could change her life. Rihanna felt that she had had enough of the palace life, and the war that was engulfing the country seemed strange and ridiculous. It was all too far removed from what she considered important for herself and her future. Igor was once known for his short temper, but Rihanna has now noticed that she is not the same. Perhaps he has changed, and now her absence is affecting his behavior, causing him to lose his temper. Basil tried to explain to His Majesty that taking part in a battle on the water was too dangerous and not worth risking his life for. He believed that his role in this matter was extremely dubious and unjustified. However, Basil could not believe that His Majesty was actually going to personally participate in a battle on the water. It seemed absurd and incomprehensible to those who were used to seeing him in more calm positions. Igor could not understand at all what exactly was happening. He believed that the king was doing the right thing because his goal was to protect the country from danger, to prevent threats from entering its territory. Basil insisted that the real problem was that we couldn't stop at this point. He believed that hesitation could lead to catastrophic consequences and that we had to act decisively. The king noticed that Basil was greatly exaggerating. He was sure that the situation was not so dangerous, and such violent reactions were just his tendency to exaggerate problems. Basil disagreed with the king. He believed that the king was not noticing the full might of Crichton's fleet, which stood before them, ready for action. This was a harbinger of great danger. The situation seemed tense, but to Basil, it was a clear sign that they were at the front. He felt the fear gradually disappear and determination begin to permeate him. Igor insisted that they should remain calm and not panic. In his opinion, this was just an attempt to intimidate them to create the appearance of a threat. But in reality, everything would be fine. Fortunately, it was Crichton's ships that had arrived here first, and Igor was confident that when the time came, they would be able to welcome them with open arms. He believed in success and the possibility of making peace. Basil, unsure of Igor's optimistic outlook, asked when that moment would come. Igor replied that it had already come, that everything happening right now was a decisive moment. The man could not understand what was happening and did not understand what was happening. He was confused, but Igor, without wasting time, gave the order to raise a couple of hundred people to carry out an important task. The man was in complete shock, unable to believe that all this was happening. Igor, without hesitation, gave the order. The army must move forward without stopping and without wasting time. Igor insisted that fire be opened on Crichton's ships. He was sure that it was necessary for defense, and that measures had to be taken immediately to not give the enemy a chance to respond. The man again could not believe his eyes, that all these events were happening before his eyes. His anxiety grew, and he felt the pressure on him increasing with each passing second. Dvoretsky noted that the news that led to such events was delivered by their man who personally appeared at the scene of the incident and saw everything with his own eyes. The man felt he should have realized that everything that was happening was inevitable. He should have seen it coming when he kicked his mother out, and now it was too late to change anything. Igor realized that he needed to immediately report the emergency to the highest circles. It required an urgent response, and every moment was important for the country's security. Igor ordered an immediate council meeting to discuss further steps and make decisions. At this time, events were taking place in the previous estate that required attention. Mistress Rihanna finally arrived at the estate, and Mary greeted her with great joy. She was happy to see her, especially after her mistress had been away for so long. Mary began to worry, as the lady had not been to the estate for quite some time, and she thought that something had happened since her absence had been prolonged. Questions and worries did not leave her. Rihanna apologized for the delay and admitted that she had arrived too late. Marina, noticing her arrival, immediately began asking what had happened in the palace and whether there was any important news. Miss Rihanna didn't know how to tell her what had happened. The situation was tense, and she wasn't sure how best to approach the conversation without affecting Marina's emotions. When the maid listened to her mistress, she was horrified. She could not believe that the princess had started such a game, and she did not know how to deal with it. What to do next? It's not clear what the princess was thinking. Rihanna first said that she did it for her, so don't be too angry with her. Mary could not consider the princess's behavior justified because she had previously committed similar antics when someone did not agree to marry her. This was not news to her circle, and Mary considered it a manifestation of capriciousness. Rihanna's actions led to rumors that she was extremely picky and perhaps even overly arrogant. The war only made matters worse, making it even more difficult for her to find a suitable groom. Rihanna admitted that it is even easier for her now, since she does not want to think about marriage at all. Such a confession was a surprise for everyone, since the princess had previously raised questions about her future more than once. The maid, hearing these words, became upset and remarked that perhaps Rihanna did not want to marry because of her father. This was the version that could explain her disappointment in marriage. 5 years later, when Rihanna had already left for Crichton, Geoffrey reported the terrible news: the death of Count Allison. This news shocked many, and everyone began to wonder what had happened. Geoffrey wrote a letter to Miss Rihanna expressing his condolences and asking about her well-being. He sincerely regretted having to break such tragic news. Lady Letitia was the one who found the Earl dead in his chambers. She discovered his body when she came to visit and immediately knew that something was wrong with him. It was a hard discovery for everyone. A small vial of poison was found in the room with the Count, which gave reason to believe that he had committed suicide. The circumstances of his death became mysterious, and talk began of a possible suicide. This was not the first time such a death had occurred in the Count's life, as he had died in a similar manner in a previous life, presumably also committing suicide. These similarities were alarming and raised questions about the connection between the events. Some people started to speculate that his death was somehow connected to Letizia, but at that point, it was just speculation. Many rumors were circulating around, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Rihanna decided not to dwell on those thoughts. She knew it wasn't worth dwelling on. Everything had changed, and now that she looked at the situation, it was clear that dwelling on the past was unwise. It was rumored that the former Count had decided to take such a step because he could not pay off his enormous debts. They had accumulated as a result of his passion for gambling, and the debt hole he had fallen into was incurable. The Count lost his title and was unable to open mines with the precious mineral which deprived him of his only source of income. His meager pension could not cover his expenses, and he found himself in a dire financial situation. Rihanna, think again. People really don't change. She came to the conclusion that it would be better for the Earl to keep his family name, so as the Countess had requested, he was buried next to her. Lady Letizia agreed with Rihanna on this point, although her opinion was not so decisive. In the end, she gave in, agreeing to the decision, receiving a certain amount as consolation for the loss. Letitia has been missing since then. That's all he wanted to report. He offers his condolences. The funeral went well, so she hopes she won't worry about it. What brought Rihanna suffering and ultimately led to her death no longer exists, and now her life is filled with long-awaited peace. Everything she experienced was behind her, and she could begin a new stage. Rihanna hoped that the events of her past would not be repeated. No one knew where Letitia was at the moment, and in her opinion, this should provide peace and safety. Rihanna's father had an influence on her views on marriage, but it was far from the main reason for her decision. Her father's influence was just one of many factors that influenced her choice. So despite her worries, the girl decided to calm Mary down, saying that it had nothing to do with her father. Rihanna tried to explain that her decision did not depend on the influence of family circumstances. Miss Rihanna simply didn't want marriage to be the main goal of her life. She had a hard childhood, and it shaped her views. Now she had her own view of happiness, which was not associated with coercion. But now there were important people in her life, like her uncle and Dima, who supported her and helped her through the difficulties. This brought her peace and confidence in the future. She was genuinely happy that she had Mary, who was always there. And for Rihanna, this was very important. Mary could not worry because Rihanna was calm and confident in her relationship. Rihanna's words touched Mary deeply. The maid was surprised and grateful for such trust, and her heart was filled with warmth. It meant more to her than she could ever express. At this time, Dima approached Rihanna, invited her to have lunch, and suggested going to the dining room. He gently asked the little girl to join them, but Rihanna was not happy with this treatment. Rihanna immediately became indignant and told Dima not to call her baby anymore. This word clearly irritated her, and she decided to make it clear that she did not accept such treatment. Dima, noticing her indignation, joked that he heard the princess do something with the dinner and suggested that she was an accomplice. However, Rihanna explained that everything was completely different. He also noted that she had enough strength to kill a whole bear, and the situation with the boys was much less serious. In his style, Dima did not miss the opportunity to joke, but Rihanna was serious. After that, Dima suggested that Rihanna go hunting with them, but the girl refused, saying that she did not want to participate. Then, Dima suggested that they go fishing instead, thinking that it would be less stressful. Rihanna briefly responded for Dima to open the door, and at that moment, they abruptly entered the room. The atmosphere changed, and she preferred that everything happen without unnecessary words and ceremonies. Ms. Rihanna wasn't quite sure what was going on. There was a commotion in the room, and she felt something was wrong. There was a sense of anxiety and tension in the air. Dima didn't understand what was happening either. Suddenly, his father turned to him, and he looked very worried. Dima didn't know what exactly had happened, but he understood that the situation was serious. Dima didn't want to reveal his thoughts, but Rihanna's father said that what they had been afraid of for so long had happened. It caused everyone to feel fear and a premonition of trouble. Crichton lost to Arundel. This news shocked both Dima and his sister. They were horrified by this turn of events, and it was a real blow to everyone. The girl could not comprehend that Crichton had been defeated by Arundel. She did not know what would happen next, what consequences this defeat would bring, and what changes awaited them in the future. There was tension in the Crichton Parliament Palace. Defeat was obvious, and the ruler seemed to be trying to convey this to everyone present, showing that the situation required immediate action. Everyone present began to actively discuss who commanded the fleet, how they could have allowed such a catastrophe. Questions flew into the air, and no one knew how to answer these accusations. They came to the conclusion that if Crichton had not fallen for Arundel's provocation, perhaps all this could have been avoided. But now there was nothing to be done, and they were faced with an inevitable outcome. There were accusations in the room about who would take responsibility for what had happened. Everyone pointed fingers at the other, not wanting to take the blame. The Crown Prince of Crichton, Eden Roscoff. Crichton sat silently, not interfering in the conversation. His face was hidden from everyone, but his silence spoke louder than any words. At one point, Eden lost his temper and loudly asked what all the fuss was about. He demanded that everyone stop chatting and focus on solving the problem, not blaming. He ordered that everyone should think not about guilt, but about what measures could be taken in response to what was happening. No one dared to object to his words, and the hall immediately became quieter. From that moment on, the prince declared that anyone who continued to engage in meaningless conversations would risk losing their tongue. He was not going to waste time on empty discussions. He was extremely disappointed with the uselessness of everyone around him, so he asked Daniil to immediately read the current situation report and give a clear picture of the situation. The report stated that 156 ships and 8,000 soldiers participated in the naval battle. The enemy lost about 10 ships, and 100 soldiers were either wounded or killed in the battle. Everyone present was horrified by what they heard, but they could not help but notice that the loss of 10 ships was not such a big loss in the context of the scale of the battle and the entire operation. The prince tried to find a positive in the situation, noting that the damage could be quickly repaired, but he knew that this was only part of the problem, not the solution. However, the ship's return to port for repairs was not as easy as expected. During the journey, they encountered a powerful storm, which greatly complicated their return. As a result, the entire fleet was lost, and now Arundel's ships were approaching Crichton, which meant new threats to the country and its population. The crown prince was shocked. He could not understand how they had allowed themselves to end up in such a situation, and was in complete shock at what was happening. Eden was confused as to what the king was thinking, and he seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Igor was asking whether Arendel's ships were heading straight for Seviot Harbor in Crichton. King Crichton's ship was heading towards this port. The prince was sure that they had to hurry, and he saw nothing difficult in it despite all the danger that awaited them. Basil, who had been closely monitoring the situation, noticed that very little time had passed since the last naval battle, and this could mean that the enemy was preparing for a new attack. Crichton urgently needed to reorganize his forces, but the king apparently was in no hurry to act, believing that they had not suffered significant losses and that they could cope with the situation without great sacrifice. Basil asked him what he thought about the honeymoon. Given the current situation, she assumed he would divorce her before the ink was dry on the prenuptial agreement. The whole thing seemed absurd to her. He couldn't even imagine the insults his wife had written in her letters during the 2 months of the war. If she filed for divorce, he was ready to take on all the responsibility and all the consequences without abandoning his obligations. Igor assured her with a smile that he would of course do it, so there was no need to worry or fret. He assured her that everything would be resolved as soon as she calmed down and stopped worrying about a possible divorce. He intended to assign her a pension for her deceased husband, even before she signed the divorce papers. Igor was sure that in this way, it would be possible to avoid many problems and difficult situations in the future. Igor said he would have to choose whether he would become food for a whale or a shark. Basil replied that they were going to the sea capital of Crichton, where everything would be decided much faster and with minimal losses. Everything was going exactly as Igor wanted. He noticed that he had to endure all of Basil's antics before he could start working. However, despite everything he knew, that it was inevitable and everything would get better soon. Apparently, only Igor had such a disobedient assistant. Basil said that his whining should be taken as a tribute, where in fact there is a very stubborn king. He did everything outside the rules, but this was his own style. Igor laughed and said that he would ignore all of this, not paying attention to his assistant's minor complaints. It was not so important in light of the big tasks they had to solve. Igor also asked if Basil had conveyed their demands to Crichton. He wanted to make sure that everything was going according to plan, and that they had managed to establish the necessary connections to further advance their cause. Basil noted that he had sent the demands as soon as he had the chance. There was probably a lot of turmoil in Crichton now. Everyone was beginning to realize that the situation was getting out of hand. However, the assistant wanted to make sure that Igor was really going to act according to the plan and would not change his mind at the last moment. He was interested in the end goal and how exactly the problems would be solved. Basil could ask for such things, but he did not understand why it was all done. He wondered if this war was necessary at all, since the consequences could be too severe for everyone. But the reason remained unclear, and if he didn't find out everything to the end, she might run away again. Without definitive answers, it was difficult to make a plan, and this worried him more and more. At this time, Rihanna was spending time with the princess again, and they were picking tangerines together. The princess was trying to concentrate on her work, but she felt that something was wrong inside her, and it was bothering her. Rihanna noticed that something was clearly wrong with the princess and decided to ask if she was okay. The princess looked tense and worried, which couldn't help but make Rihanna worried. The lady admitted that she had hoped that she would feel better if she moved, but it was not so easy. She felt her strength leaving her despite all her efforts to hold on. The princess asked Rihanna what they should do now in this situation. She did not know what to do next, and all her determination began to fade despite all her efforts. Rihanna assured her that there was no need to worry Arundel, and Crichton had a common enemy, the Toulouse Empire, and that gave them a chance to resolve the conflict. She tried to calm her down, assuring her that they were not alone. She continued that the king was no fool. If he came to Crichton, he would try to resolve the situation as best he could. Rihanna assured the princess that everything would be done as it should be, and she should not worry. The king had gone to such extremes because a ship from Crichton had entered his country's waters trespassing. This interference had caused him to take decisive action beyond the usual political maneuvers. Once this issue is resolved, he will no longer be a threat to Crichton. Even in his previous life in the games, he had plans to turn Arundel into a powerful naval power. Because of this, he will not directly feud with Crichton, despite Eager's stupidity in understanding what is happening so poorly, acting as always on his own motives. Rihanna couldn't understand why the princess was looking at her so strangely, as if she was hiding something important. She felt that something was wrong between them, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The lady noted that Rihanna had never claimed that Crichton belonged to them. This statement of hers somehow confused the princess, and she wondered what could have been said incorrectly. Rihanna didn't know what to say to that, and the princess, noticing her confusion, explained that she wasn't blaming the girl. She just understood that Rihanna wasn't defending Arundel, and that was okay. The princess said she was simply claiming that Rihanna was from Crichton, but she felt that the girl herself thought she had nothing to do with the place, which worried her. The girl admitted that she was scared by these words, but Rihanna did not quite understand what exactly the princess meant. She could not grasp her feelings and intentions in this conversation. The princess, unable to bear it, rushed into Rihanna's arms, breaking down into emotions. She said that she was afraid of losing her only friend and did not know what to do with this fear. Rihanna never shared her feelings with the princess, preferring to keep them to herself. It was her personal experience, and she did not dare to open up even to her close friend. The princess felt that one day Rihanna would leave. She began to realize that their friendship might not last forever, and this thought filled her heart with sadness and worry. 6 years ago, on the day the princess arrived in Crichton, a terrible tragedy occurred. She was poisoned. That day became a moment of pain and fear for her, which left a deep mark on her soul. Memories of her past life became tormenting nightmares for the princess, causing physical and mental pain. Each memory was like a knife blade piercing her consciousness. When she became an adult, her health improved, but the memories continued to bother her, leaving her with a feeling of anxiety and inner fear. She could not get rid of these heavy thoughts. Rihanna thought about moving to a remote place to get rid of this constant anxiety. She wanted to be where the king could not find her, hoping for peace and quiet away from politics. Rihanna still decided to ask the princess where she was going to go, because she had long ago left her estate in Arundel to come to Crichton. It was an important and personal decision for her. The princess agreed to the question, but said that there were some complications that could interfere with her plans. However, she did not want to go into these details, leaving everything vague. Rihanna suggested not to discuss it now, but rather just go for a walk to change the scenery and forget about heavy thoughts. She believed that movement would help them get distracted from everything. Suddenly, as they were walking, the princess was called out. It was someone who was hurrying towards them, and Rihanna felt the tension in the air increase sharply, making her wary. It was the governess who, noticing the princess, cried out in horror that it was very good that she was there. She seemed alarmed and could not hide her excitement, which immediately attracted attention. The lady could not understand what was happening and did not know the reason for such an unexpected outburst of emotions. She tried to understand the situation, but could not really understand anything. Arundel had conveyed his demands, and now they were asking for a marriage with the princess. This news shocked everyone, because no one expected such a turn of events, especially in the context of a royal wedding. Everyone was shocked to hear about the royal wedding. The news came as an unexpected blow to everyone who was close, and no one knew how to react to such political maneuvers. Rihanna was in shock. She couldn't believe what was happening. Everything was happening too fast, and she couldn't understand how everything had changed so suddenly. Her feelings were overwhelmed with confusion and anxiety. Even though her future had been changed, and even though she had always rejected political marriages, the man who had always opposed them suddenly proposed such a wedding. It was completely unexpected for her. The princess seemed destined to leave her home palace and go to Arundel as a hostage. It was an extremely difficult decision, one she would hardly have made if she had had a choice. At that moment, she felt dizzy and began to lose consciousness. But the girl who was nearby hurried to catch her, preventing her from falling, trying to support her in this state. Rihanna immediately screamed, calling the governess to action, demanding that she do something. The woman did not lose her composure and offered to immediately carry the princess to her chambers to help her there. The international marriage was essentially a formality, but in reality, the princess became a political trophy. It was extremely cruel and inhumane, despite all the official rhetoric. One of the gentlemen present at the meeting remarked that since everyone was silent, he would like to speak out. He believed that in reality this was just an ordinary international marriage, which did not present any particular problems or difficulties. He said that such marriages had happened before, and there was no point in worrying about it. He believed that it was all normal, and there was hardly any point in focusing on what was happening. The crown prince was very surprised by these words. He could not understand why everyone was so calm about this situation, when in his opinion, it was right now that he needed to worry in order to prevent disaster. He became angry and expressed his bewilderment, saying that he clearly did not understand the essence of what was happening. In the past, such marriages were concluded for the sake of establishing diplomatic relations and maintaining peace between countries. He was sure that the man did not realize what the real danger was. In the current situation, the princess would not participate in a political union, but would simply become a hostage to her circumstances. He stated that the man's proposal was wrong and clearly inappropriate to the situation. His opinion was that it was a threat to everyone involved in the decision. He knew that King Igor had always rejected marriage proposals in Arundel, and now his behavior seemed suspicious. Why had he suddenly agreed to an international alliance? This sudden turn of events made one wonder. Perhaps King Igor was trying to use this proposal to put pressure on their country in order to gain certain benefits hidden behind the visible political game. This proposal could be part of a strategy aimed at interfering in the affairs of their kingdom. After all, if the king uses the princess as a weapon of pressure, it will not only be political manipulation, but also a personal tragedy for hers. Sending her to Arundel as a trophy to symbolize victory in a political game seemed horrific and humiliating. It was simply disgusting, especially considering how many times it had happened before. The prince was furious, not knowing what to do next. He had already realized that they could not prevent what had happened, and this filled him with anger and despair that the choice had been made without taking their will into account. Frustrated and angry, he couldn't accept that they couldn't stop it. The whole situation was out of his control, and it seemed unfair and unacceptable to him. Suddenly, one of the men raised his hand and addressed a question to His Majesty. This attracted the attention of everyone present, and it became clear that the discussion was gaining momentum. At this point, the servants brought news that the princess had become ill. She needed help, and this put everyone in a difficult situation because no one expected such a turn of events at such a moment. The crown prince called a break in the discussions. He said everyone could leave the room until he returned, but this only added to the tension and confusion among those who did not understand what was happening. Everyone present was confused by what was happening, not knowing how to react. Everything seemed too sudden, and no one could understand how they ended up in this situation, as if the world was collapsing around them. Dmitri, who had already encountered similar events, remained calm. It was hard for him to believe that something so serious could happen, and he did not understand what exactly was about to happen. Dmitri's father approached him, and noticing his silence, asked where Rihanna was now. This question made Dmitri concentrate, since the answer to it could change the course of further events. At that moment, the prince appeared in the princess's palace. Bursting into the room with a loud cry, he immediately attracted the attention of everyone nearby. His action was unexpected, and everyone turned in his direction. He looked around and noticed that Rihanna and the princess were in the room, and at first glance, she seemed fine. The prince felt relieved because he was told that she had fainted, But it didn't seem like she was that bad. He approached her with determination and, concerned about her condition, asked how she was feeling. He wanted to know if what had happened had affected her, and he was trying to be caring despite his excitement. The girl replied that she was more or less all right, that she felt fine. But of course, everything was unexpected. The prince noticed that her hands were cold and suggested that she rest until she recovered. Despite her words, the girl explained that she was simply very surprised by what happened, but in fact, everything was fine. She tried to calm everyone down, although she herself was shocked by what was happening. The princess's brother was on fire, reassuring everyone around that there was no need to worry about this. He assured everyone that such things would never happen again, and the princess was very worried about this incident. Despite all the losses and difficulties, Crichton remained firm. He did not panic and remained calm, despite all the anxiety that was hovering around him and his sister. He could not understand who dared to disturb the princess with such baseless rumors and false statements. He was outraged and wanted to know who exactly could frighten her to such an extent. He asked who exactly had scared the princess so badly that she had fainted. His voice was determined to find out the truth and protect his sister from any threats or worries. He also wanted to know who after this incident could call themselves the princess's servants, if in his opinion these people did not ensure her safety and peace. Helena, noticing that her brother was getting angry, asked him to calm down. She explained that her servants were not to blame, since she herself was very timid, and there was no point in shifting the blame onto them. Despite what was happening, Helena was worried about her servants. It seemed strange, especially at a time when she should have been focusing on her own condition. Even in such a state when her strength was running out, the princess maintained her kindness and care. She should not worry about others at this moment. She only needed to recover, and a loved one should take care of her. The prince's gaze turned to Rihanna, and she immediately realized that he was going to put all the blame on her. She knew that the prince could be determined, and she prepared herself for this. Rihanna said he was right, and the prince responded by expressing his displeasure, noting that she remained as indifferent as a stone. He was sure that she should have acted according to his rules. The prince knew that she had to be brought up according to his strict rules, so that she would conform to his expectations and manners. This was part of his plan to make her the person he wanted her to be. The more he observed her, the more he felt the need to teach her manners and strict rules. He was sure that in this way she would become more suitable for his ideals. If she hadn't been his sister's friend, he would have forced her to become a part of his life long ago, subordinating her to his will. He was ready for this, despite her current coldness. Rihanna, noticing the prince's gaze, turned decisively to the princess's brother. She insisted that her friend was not guilty of anything, and that the blame should not be shifted to her. Helena couldn't understand why her brother continued to be angry at everyone and everything. His irritation seemed to be directed at everyone in his field of vision, and this worried her more and more. The crown prince explained that this time he was just joking. He added that at the request of the princess, he would forgive them, but there would be no such forgiveness next time. His words were stern and confident. He told everyone to remember his words and ordered them to leave the room immediately. His mood remained on the verge of explosion and did not tolerate further discussion. It had been a very hard day, and Helena felt the fatigue gripping her body. Against this background, she felt a strange premonition that did not leave her, making her worry. Rihanna didn't know what was going to happen, but she felt like something was already starting to unfold. Thoughts were running through her head, but she couldn't quite figure out what it was. She noticed that the maid handed her something important. It was strange, and Rihanna felt that this gesture was not accidental. Something was about to happen. When Rihanna opened the note, she found a letter from Dima. He offered to meet her right now in the garden behind the palace, which surprised her because it was quite unexpected. She headed to the garden behind the princess's palace and soon met her brother. She was a little nervous, as there had never been any meetings at such a late hour. Rihanna was genuinely happy to see Dima, but her joy quickly turned to worry when she noticed his agitated appearance. He was clearly worried about something, and this made her wary. She immediately asked him what he was doing there at such an hour, since he was supposed to be at a cabinet meeting. She couldn't understand how he could be so careless. Dima admitted that he saw no point in staying at a meeting that, in his opinion, would not produce any decisions. So he decided to leave, unable to listen to the meaningless talk any longer. She reminded him that he would be reprimanded by his uncle for such behavior, but he reassured her by saying that he had left with his elder's permission. He also informed her that they could now go on a date. Rihanna was shocked by his words. She did not expect that he would seriously ask her to go on a date right now. It sounded too sudden and strange for her. Dima kissed her hand and, smiling, said that the date should take place right now. His confidence and determination made Rihanna feel that this moment was inevitable. Rihanna didn't understand what was happening when Dima grabbed her hand and pulled her along with him. She tried to ask something to find out what happened, but all she heard was his hurried silence. Dima quickly said that he would explain everything later, but now was not the time. They had to run away urgently, and he clearly was not going to stop despite her questions and bewilderment. He was sure that his father had to do everything right, otherwise their whole plan could collapse. It was not for nothing that his father asked about Rihanna, and this required attention. He understood the importance of what was happening. Then, when he was asked where she was, he replied that she was in the princess's palace. He himself could not understand what exactly was happening, but he did not have time to find out all the details, and everything remained foggy. Dima couldn't check what anyone might think or say, but he still behaved as quietly as possible, so as not to attract attention, and asked everyone to follow him, trying to keep calm in the situation. When they got outside, his father said he had a pass with the royal seal of Crichton. With this document, they could go anywhere without fear of consequences, which was an important point. Dima was completely perplexed, not understanding what was going on at all, and tried to escape from the situation by at least explaining something to his father, who was so sure of what was happening that he did not give in to doubts. Dima's father noted that he was aware that this pass could not be used without the king's permission. But in this situation, they could not hesitate because time was running out, and much depended on their speed. Arundel's demands again. Strategy needed to be discussed, and the document with diplomatic instructions was his most important task at that moment. To end the war, in addition to paying reparations, they proposed an international marriage. A woman of the royal family of marriageable age would be ordered by the crown prince to become a bride. However, he could not understand why Rihanna was mentioned in these sentences. It was strange and incomprehensible to him because she had nothing to do with this issue and her name seemed superfluous. He decided to ask the guy if maybe he knew who else had seen these documents before them and was aware of the contents which could explain such a strange situation involving Rihanna. The boy asked in surprise which documents exactly were in question. Those concerning reparations or others that had been reviewed by the crown prince. This cleared up the situation a little, but there was still much that was unclear. Dima knew that these documents had been reviewed by Daniel Rurik, which could add more questions to their contents, and why they ended up in the hands of his father, who intended to act on them. Her father was going to send Rianne to Arundel, despite the family's opinion. It was a big decision that he made without consulting anyone else, and his confidence in the rightness of his step left no room for doubt. Dima, feeling anxious, began to argue that Rihanna had already been through a lot and did not deserve to be sent to Arundel again. He could not accept this, knowing that she had already suffered from those events. The father replied that he was also worried about Rihanna, because she was the daughter of his only sister, and he still regretted that he could not stop her when she decided to marry a man from this kingdom. When Rihanna told her brother about her intention to get married, she was happy. Her eyes were shining with joy, and she really wanted this marriage, even despite all the risks that could arise. If he had known how her marriage would end, he would never have let her go there. He regretted that he had not been persistent enough and had not been able to prevent her from making a mistake at that moment. He couldn't let Rihanna go through the same ordeal that her mother had gone through. He had a lot of pain in his heart for her fate, and he didn't want her to repeat her tragic story. Time was running out. He knew he had to get Rihanna as soon as possible, before the important meeting ended. Otherwise, they risked ending up in an even more difficult situation where action would no longer be possible. They set off quickly, not knowing exactly where they were going, simply following the direction that their intuition and circumstances suggested. As time passed, the path seemed increasingly uncertain and strange. Rihanna explained to Dima that the road they were taking did not lead to the city as expected. She felt uncertain and confused, not knowing where they were going or what awaited them. She couldn't understand where they were going, but the guy, without explaining right away, asked for forgiveness and promised to tell her as soon as they were safe, having escaped pursuit. There was no time for detailed explanations now, but Rihanna was increasingly at a loss, not understanding what was happening around her and not knowing what awaited her in the future. The princess asked again what she had just been told, as she had just been told that Rihanna would be sent to Arendelle in her place. This statement left her confused and bewildered. The brother confirmed that it was true Arendelle had asked for this particular royal girl, and nothing about the princess was mentioned in the conversation. The situation became more and more complicated and tense. This meant that even the fact that Rihanna was not directly related to the royal family did not matter to the decision that was made. Once in this situation, everything was subject to a different order. However, the princess was categorically against this. She said that it was impossible to send her friend into a dangerous situation, especially when she herself could not be where she rightfully should be. The princess lost her mother and decided to come here to cope with her grief. Rihanna became her only friend who had gone through the same horror, and now she was being sent in her place, which was incomprehensible to her. She was deeply shocked to learn that her only support and loved one, Rihanna, was to be held hostage in her place, despite the fact that she was supposed to be where she belonged. Her brother asked her with obvious bewilderment why she was saying this, suggesting that she wanted to go to Arendelle instead of Rihanna, but she could hardly imagine such an outcome. The crown prince was determined not to let his sister become a hostage, even if it meant a clash with the kingdom itself. He was prepared to protect her at any cost. Helena tried to convince him to reconsider his decision, begging him to change his plans. But the prince did not even want to listen to her, confident that the decision had been made, and nothing could be changed. He didn't know what to do with such a naive and kind-hearted sister who, despite everything, was ready to sacrifice herself for others. This put him in a difficult position. Her friend who managed to escape does not even suspect what feelings her friend is experiencing. She does not know how difficult it is for her and cannot understand the full gravity of the situation she found herself in. The princess, who did not immediately understand what her brother was talking about, asked in surprise who had escaped. She was sure that Rihanna had recently been nearby and could not understand why her brother was so worried. Today, the princess asked to be listened to and declared that from now on, Rihanna was no longer her friend. Not even her servant Rihanna had to understand that for the princess, everything had changed. Dimitri's father objected, saying that he did not agree with such a decision. She was a young girl who suffered from mental pain, and she had a good heart. He believed that she would not survive this marriage. However, being a royal, she had no choice. Everyone agreed that she was an Arendelle, and she quickly adapted to her new life and role. However, the crown prince did not understand why Marquis Previous was so upset. He believed that this decision was best for Arendelle and Crichton, and did not understand such a reaction from the Marquise. The prince believed that the lady's appearance was as beautiful as Princess Helena's, and that the king would certainly be pleased with such a choice. He saw no problem with this decision. The Marquis, in response to this, asked whether the Duke had spoken about the life of a girl who was alien to him, and why he so easily decided her fate without understanding her true feelings. The Marquis wondered if the Duke would be so carefree if his daughter were in Rihanna's place. The man fell silent as he understood that he had no right to discuss this matter without being a wife. It was simply unbelievable. The Marquis could not understand how other aristocrats, whom he considered his allies, could act like this without sharing his concerns about Rihanna's fate. The men that night demanded that Marquis Previous prove his loyalty to Crichton. This decision had to be made immediately, without further thought, and everyone expected action. Everyone insisted that he send Rihanna to Arendelle. They proposed an international marriage, with Rihanna, the Marquis's niece, considering it the best move for political interests. The princess asked her governess in horror where her friend was now. She felt lost and scared, not understanding what was happening and what would happen to her next. The governess replied that Rihanna had left, and upon hearing this, her brother simply looked at the princess in silence, without expressing any emotion, but clearly puzzled by her question and her condition. The maid had not seen Rihanna since the arrival of the crown prince. She may have left the palace, but no one knew exactly where she had gone or what had happened to her since the last time they had seen her. The princess was completely terrified. Her feelings were overwhelmed, and she could not find words to express what was happening in her soul at that moment. Her world was collapsing, and she was at a loss. She couldn't believe that Rihanna hadn't even bothered to tell her about her decision. It was too sudden and painful. She couldn't comprehend that it had actually happened. The princess did not want to believe the truth, so she burst into tears and began to shout her friend's name, hoping that this would somehow change the situation and that she would return so that everything would be as before. The sudden changes that occurred when Crichton lost to Arundel influenced Rihanna's desire to change her life. This was the result of difficult circumstances that she could not cope with. Fate was decided against her will, and the girl realized that the more she tried to fight this situation, the more she became attached to the inevitability feeling like death was becoming her only choice. Rihanna asked Dima to stop because she needed to talk to him. She felt that she could no longer remain silent and was worried that they might miss something at such a moment. Dima objected that they had no time to talk because the situation required immediate action. He tried to speed up and continue on his way, fearing that they would be late. The girl was horrified by what was happening because they had to leave the capital urgently. She could not understand what was making them act this way and did not understand the seriousness of the situation. She couldn't stand it, and unable to contain her emotions, began to scream, demanding that Dima stop immediately. She couldn't continue without explanations and decided that this was the only way to get an answer. Rihanna tried to take control of the situation, started to drag the horse to stop the movement. Dima was terrified, not knowing what to do, because her actions were interfering and complicating the situation. The horse stopped, and Dima finally agreed to stop. He realized that they would not be able to continue their journey and understand what was happening if they did not talk right now. As soon as they stopped, the girl demanded an explanation. She could not continue without any explanation and insistently demanded that Dima tell her what was going on. Rihanna hoped that now Dima would tell her the truth, explain what was happening, and she would be able to understand what they needed to do next in this situation, which seemed more and more confusing. Dima sighed and said that they needed to leave Crichton immediately without waiting for an official decision. It was inevitable, and he hoped that Rihanna would understand the seriousness of what was happening. He told her that the crown prince and the duke wanted to send her to Arundel instead of the princess to use her as a hostage. This was part of a political intrigue, and Dima could not allow it. Rihanna was simply stunned by this news. She could not find words to express her shock and bewilderment. What she heard was a complete surprise to her. Dima repeated that they needed to leave Crichton before the decision was made officially. It was a vital decision, and it was too risky to delay. Rihanna, still in disbelief, asked what would happen to him and her uncle. She was planning to leave, but she was worried about what would happen to them and how it would affect their lives. Dima was taken aback by her question, as he had expected her to be more focused on herself. He understood that they had no time to think, but he couldn't help but notice her anxiety. He kept insisting that they needed to finish what they had started, but Rihanna started screaming, saying that he knew the prince wouldn't leave them alone. She couldn't just forget about it. She couldn't understand how he couldn't be concerned about their safety because she was part of this family too. She believed that everything that was happening concerned not only her, but all members of the family. Dima, irritated by her lack of understanding, began to shout for her to obey quickly. At that moment, the girl saw for the first time how angry he could be and realized how tense the situation was. He hugged her, trying to calm her down, and told her that she really was their family. He asked her not to say that because her words hurt him, and he wanted her to believe in their plan. Dima said that he and his father had come up with this plan to save at least one member of the family. He assured her that it was not done for her sake alone, but for the sake of the whole family, to avoid a catastrophe. He explained that it would be hard, and they would have great difficulties, but they had no choice. They had to do it, otherwise the consequences would be even worse. Dima said that if they had done otherwise, they would have regretted it very much. He tried to convince her that there was no need to worry, and that if she just left, everything would be fine. After these words, Rihanna couldn't hold back and burst into tears. It was the first time she really cried after her rebirth. Feeling the full weight of what was happening, Rihanna felt a deep sense of relief because Dimitri was next to her, which brought comfort and helped her forget about the worries and regrets of the past. His presence brought a sense of calm, distracting her from previous worries. At this time, Arundel's fleet was in Crichton Harbor, awaiting further orders. The locals were just talking, knowing that important events were about to take place that would determine the fate of the region. Igor, standing under the open sky, looked at the stars. His thoughts were occupied with something important when his faithful servant Basil approached him, who also seemed to be thinking about what was happening around him. Basil noticed that a week had passed since their arrival at this port and realized that this time might bring changes in their lives because they began to think about how to proceed. King Igor, turning to his chamberlain, asked him what he thought about what was happening around him. The chamberlain, listening attentively to his master, decided to ask him what he was thinking about that night. Igor noticed that there were no particular thoughts in his head, but he was haunted by the idea that it was time to act. He continued to consider possible steps, although he was not sure of his determination. The guy next to Igor was in complete horror, realizing that his master was actually ready to make a decision that could change everything. He was afraid that everything would not go according to plan, but he remained silent, waiting. Crichton, furious about the reparations and marriage obligations, saw the situation as a threat. He began to suspect that it was all aimed at him and that decisions could lead to unpredictable consequences. Igor, however, was sure that he should not perceive the situation as a threat. He took out a pendant made of arkstone from his pocket and examined it carefully, thinking about how this symbol could play an important role. His faithful servant, standing nearby, immediately noticed the pendant and carefully watched Igor's actions. He noticed how his master was ready to throw the stone into the sea without thinking about what it could mean. It was Igor's engagement party, and at that moment, he decided to let go of the stone that symbolized his future. He threw it into the sea, hoping that it would bring good luck and new prospects for his life. When the stone touched the water, it immediately emitted bright flashes like fireworks. Igor watched this spectacle with pleasure. There was happiness in his eyes that everything happened as he expected. Basil was amazed at how easily Igor enjoyed this moment. To him as a servant, such little things seemed insignificant, but he could not help but notice how his master enjoyed every moment. Seviot Harbor, a man watching the event, was completely at a loss to understand what was happening. He was completely bewildered as he looked at the bright flashes and could not understand what had caused such a show. The observers in the harbor were shocked by what had happened. They could not understand why fireworks were suddenly being launched. It was probably the conclusion of an important international marriage with Arundel that led to the celebration. This firework, which later became known as Arundel's courtship, was created from an incredibly expensive stone, attracting attention with its brightness and power. Its magnificence was difficult to overestimate. Igor realized that this unique moment was made possible by Atraxia, which opened up incredible perspectives for him and led to chances he might not have had otherwise. Igor, despite all his wealth, was ready to give everything to meet again with that mysterious woman who changed his life and to feel her presence again. The crown prince was furious, claiming that Igor was a crazy and ignorant bastard. He couldn't understand how anyone could send them a princess who was so important to their kingdom. He could not understand how Igor dared to enter their waters and set off such a fireworks display. The common people who watched this were convinced that it was all connected with the upcoming wedding, and they had questions. The crown prince, in turn, was furious, believing that Igor's action was intended to send the princess as a gift to the king, not realizing that completely different intentions were hidden behind it. He started yelling at Daniel, demanding an explanation of where Rihanna was, at the moment not wanting to leave the question unanswered. His anger only grew with each passing minute. The Duke, trying to remain calm, said that they were currently trying to find out Rihanna's whereabouts, and that they did not have any exact information yet, but they did not stop looking. The Crown Prince could not calm down, his rage only grew. He believed that everyone had to act immediately, otherwise the consequences would be extremely unpleasant for all involved. He shouted sharply that Rihanna must be brought here immediately, If necessary, he was ready to catch her himself to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. He added that if anyone failed to follow his instructions, it could cost him his head, hinting at the harsh consequences that awaited those who dared to disobey his orders. The Duke was somewhat true to his beliefs, as Dmitri Previous managed to escape from the palace like a cowardly rat, which left him feeling betrayed and dissatisfied. The Duke bought a maid so that she could help read the important note, but he did not expect that they would be able to escape from the capital so quickly, despite all the obstacles that could hinder them. To leave the capital, a pass from the royal family was needed. The Duke, remembering the Marquis Previous, the head of diplomats, realized that he could help resolve this issue. The Duke knew that the Marquis Previous would be able to easily arrange for the pass to be issued, which he believed would make the task much easier. But there were still many issues that needed to be resolved. He was sure that getting a pass would be a more complicated process than he expected. However, no matter what, he now had to rely on the help of someone who could provide the necessary documents. The Duke hoped that with the help of the Marquis Previous, they could find a way to convince him to help them obtain a pass, since without him, their plans would be in jeopardy. The forest near the capital of Crichton was a quiet and secluded place where Dima and Rihanna stopped. Here among the trees, they tried to find a moment to rest and think about what to do next. Dima turned to Rihanna with an apology, but she did not understand what he was asking for forgiveness for. He himself could not explain exactly what was bothering him, and simply felt that he had to say something. He hadn't thought through what they would do after they had escaped, and now it was making him uneasy. He felt uncertain because he didn't know how their lives would develop. Rihanna couldn't help but laugh when she heard this. She remembered how he used to dream of being a pirate, and now he wasn't ready for that step, and it all seemed pretty ridiculous. She noticed that all this reminded her of their childhood. Once they were children and played pirates, and now she felt a little sad that all this was left in the past. She was about 5 years old when Dima pretended to be a pirate, and she pretended to be a fairy. It was one of those games they loved, but now such moments were already distant memories. Dima remembered those games too. He would stand on a rock with a toy sword in his hands and fight imaginary enemies. Those were the moments when they could be anyone and do anything. They played all day long in the garden of her estate, carefree and joyful, absorbed in the game. Then it seemed that the whole world was only for them, and there was nothing more important than these happy moments. After the game, they often rested under the tree, enjoying the shade and silence. Sometimes they fell asleep right there, lulled by the peace and comfort of this place. Rihanna noted that perhaps that was when he decided to become homeless. Those childhood games left a mark on his soul, and he continued to seek freedom even if it meant being alone. Dima thought it was one of the happiest moments in their life in Arendelle. At that moment they were close, and the world seemed simple and clear, not requiring unnecessary words. Rihanna was left with more than just bad memories. She tried not to dwell on them, and told Dima that everything was fine. She was ready to move forward, despite all the difficulties and complications. Now it was time for them to go back. They were no longer children, and life was no longer the same. Their childhood games were in the past, and they had to look to the future. Dima was stunned by what was happening, but soon they noticed a flash of light. It was a signal that something had happened, and they could not remain inactive. Dima instantly jumped on the girl, pressing her to himself and asking her to close her eyes. He wanted to protect her, covering her with his body from what was to follow. Blinding bullets made of ARC stone were flying towards them. It was a deadly moment, and they had to act quickly to avoid being hit. Rihanna started asking questions, trying to figure out what that light was. She felt the situation was extremely tense and couldn't figure out what was going on around her. Dima continued to insist that she should not open her eyes under any circumstances. He knew that it was dangerous, and every movement could be decisive. It was a flashbang that could blind them both. They had finally been found, they were fugitives, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. When Dima heard this voice, he immediately realized that it was the Duke serving the Crown Prince. His confidence in this arose instantly, because this voice was familiar, and the behavior of the man was also familiar. This man was Daniil Duke Rurik. Dima couldn't help but ask him what was going on here, and why he needed to pursue them. He couldn't understand the reason for this turn of events. The man laughed, not hiding his mockery, and replied that Dima apparently did not understand the seriousness of the situation, since he had to pretend after all. His words did not bode well. Calling his soldiers, Duke Rurik announced that Dima was under arrest for disobedience. He said this without the slightest hesitation, as if his decision was final and irrevocable. Dmitri was extremely indignant. His heart was filled with rage, and he drew his sword. He was ready to fight, but deep down, he did not want the situation to escalate into an open clash. At this point, the princess was in a panic. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her governess noticed her confusion and asked if she was okay, trying to understand what was happening to her. Helena was worried at that moment about breaking Rihanna's favorite cup. It was a small incident, but for her, it was a real tragedy because the cup was an important reminder for her. The princess couldn't hold back her tears. She was sobbing, not understanding what was happening and where she was. There was chaos in her head, and she felt lost and helpless in this world. She remembered Rihanna once telling her that she would never leave her, and if she ever decided to leave, she would definitely say so. Those words were a promise to her that now seemed broken. However, her brother said that Rihanna was not a direct descendant of the royal family, and her fate did not matter to the parliament. This was a heavy blow for the princess, who could not understand how this was possible. The princess realized that the parliament had made a decision, and her friend had simply run away, leaving her no chance to change anything. She was in despair, realizing that the situation had already gotten out of control. The princess's brother would take advantage of the situation to send her as a hostage to Arundel. This decision had already been made, and she could not escape her fate, although she tried to find a way out. The princess realized that she had two choices: to become a hostage or to die for treason. Both paths seemed unbearable, and she did not know which one to choose, knowing that she would lose everything. She realized that she would be a bargaining chip in a political game, and now her friend was in danger. The situation was becoming increasingly threatening for both women. The princess quickly turned to the governess and asked her to help her get ready. There were too many thoughts in her head, but she knew that time was running out, and she had to act despite her fear. Her brother had made that decision the day he told her that she had to understand that from today on, Rihanna was no longer her friend or even her servant. It was a tragic prediction. As her brother said, her friend had no choice, because she was not part of the direct line of the royal family. However, the princess herself, as a member of the royal family, did have such a choice. Her friend had no power, but the princess herself, as a member of the royal family, had a choice, and her brother decided to use this to his advantage, despite the consequences for everyone. The most noble and beloved princess of Crichton, known for her kindness and devotion to the people, decided to take an extreme step for the sake of Rihanna, whom she could not call a friend but was still ready to help. Rihanna, gritting her teeth, grabbed the sword ready to fight. Her brother, standing next to her, tried to convince her otherwise to say something, but his words could not change her determination and fear. The Duke, who was watching the proceedings, asked in bewilderment if they had ever seen such a desperate girl ready to risk her life for something that, in his opinion, hardly made sense. He was sure that all their efforts were in vain. Nothing would change if they took the dead body with them. Everything would remain the same, and only death would bring more grief and pain. In this situation, she asked to be taken to the crown prince, confident that only a meeting with him would help her understand her fate and find answers to the questions that tormented her soul. Rihanna wanted to meet the prince in person to express everything that was in her heart. She could no longer remain silent, as she felt that only this meeting could change her life. Rihanna had no desire to die alone, as she had in her previous life. She could not believe that her suffering could be so cruel, and she hoped that this time everything would be different. She dreamed of finding peace and tranquility surrounded by loved ones who would support her with words of warmth and love, relieve her of loneliness and fear, and help her survive all the trials. An hour ago, Dmitri, deciding not to give up, pulled out his sword. He knew he had little chance, but he tried to protect himself. The tension was growing, and he, without thinking about the consequences, entered into a fight with soldiers who clearly outnumbered him. Dmitri did everything he could to protect his sister. His sword strikes were aimed not only at protecting himself, but also at creating at least some opportunity for her to escape from danger. The Duke, seeing their desperate resistance, shouted, accusing them of madness. He ordered his men to seize both, noting that such behavior only exposed the girl to greater risk, which further escalated the situation. Dmitri realized that the enemy was numerically stronger. His strength was gradually leaving him, and each subsequent blow was difficult. He understood that the situation was getting worse, and this could turn into a tragedy for both of them. His fear for his sister grew. He knew that if she were to suffer, it would be a catastrophe. Thoughts of the possible tragedy kept him moving forward despite his fatigue and weakened arms. The girl watched in horror as her brother tried his best to protect them. Despite his despair, Dmitri firmly said that she should run away immediately while there was still a chance for salvation. He swore he could handle it himself. However, she knew that running away could lead to severe punishment for her uncle and Dmitri. She was tormented by doubts, but she could not simply leave her brother in trouble. As she passed the canal, she noticed the dagger that belonged to Dmitri. This became a signal to her that she had at least a small chance to protect herself and intervene in what was happening. One of the guards tried to grab her, but the girl, without thinking, rushed to run. Despite the uncomfortable shoes, she did not stop overcoming fear and pain. The Duke watched her attempt with irony. He laughed loudly, sure that her escape was doomed to failure, and continued to give orders to his men. The girl did not give up. She tried to get closer to the dagger before they managed to grab her. Her hands were shaking, but she still grabbed the weapon, realizing that this was her only chance. Clutching the dagger in her hand, she screamed sharply, demanding that they stop immediately. Her voice was filled with a determination that took everyone by surprise. If they did not do this, she would kill herself. The threat sounded so serious that the guards literally froze with fear. The guards did not know what to do. The Duke's order was unambiguous, but the girl's threat made them confused. The Duke, overcome with anger, exclaimed that she was clearly mad. His cry echoed around the hall, attracting the attention of those around him. He insisted that no one in their right mind would resort to such extreme measures. Dima, seeing his sister's despair, screamed, begging her not to do it. His voice trembled with excitement, but he tried to instill confidence. He hoped that his words would help calm Rihanna. However, Rihanna, looking straight into the Duke's eyes, stated with cold calm that she had no intention of running away from the very beginning. Her voice was firm, and this caused more questions from those around her. The girl added that now she has something to say to the Duke. She openly admitted that she is ready to become a criminal in order to defend her truth and protect her loved ones. She demanded to be taken to the Crown Prince. She said she had too much to remain silent. She wanted to explain herself to the prince in person without fear of consequences. The Duke knew that her life was now valuable to them. If the princess was to be rescued, then Rihanna could become a hostage to be sent to Arundel. However, this meant that she could not be touched. At the same time, the Duke knew that getting rid of Dmitri was a great opportunity. He thought about it, weighing the risks, and realizing that this could be his chance to break their connection. Dima, despite all the threats, did not even think of picking up a sword. He defended his sister with all his might. Rihanna firmly declared her innocence, deciding to take control of the situation. Together, they were too much of a threat. The Duke had no time to think. He realized he had only one choice: to act immediately. The decision was made. The Duke agreed to escort her to the Crown Prince. He ordered everyone to prepare for immediate departure, realizing that any delay could result in disaster. Lord Previous to be sent to the royal dungeon. This order was short but decisive, so that no one would have time to ask unnecessary questions. Dima turned to his sister, trying to console her. He said that there was no need to worry about him, and that she should not agree to anything against her will. Her task was to wait for the meeting with the prince. The separation was hard for both of them, but inevitable. They had to come to terms with the circumstances. Each of them understood that the unknown, full of dangers, awaited them ahead. When Mary saw her mistress, she couldn't contain her joy. The girl ran up to Rihanna, her face glowing with relief. She couldn't believe she was seeing her mistress again. However, the joy was replaced by anxiety. The maid immediately asked if it was true that Rihanna would be sent to Arundel instead of the princess. Her voice was full of excitement and uncertainty. Rihanna, looking at Mary's worried face, reassured her. She said that there was no need to worry, and added that now that she saw her, she felt much better. Mary couldn't hold back her tears. She cried, not understanding what was happening and why everything was happening this way. For her, it all seemed like a bad dream. Rihanna, seeing her condition, suggested they talk about it later. She admitted that she was too tired to discuss anything now. Her strength was running out. Suddenly, fatigue took over. Before she could even reach her bed, Rihanna literally passed out. Her body no longer obeyed her, and she fell into a deep sleep. She couldn't sleep worrying about Dima, who needed to be pulled out of prison. However, she didn't know how to do it. Memories of Igor, his words and actions kept flashing through her head. He said that the fate of this bird was predetermined, but he himself saved it, despite this. In her memory, those moments when he showed concern and willingness to help constantly surfaced. The king lay on the floor, his head down, watching Basil closely. His gaze was deep and thoughtful. He could not tear himself away from this man, on whom he placed important hopes. After the king looked at him, he could not help but ask why Basil had an expression on his face, as if he had seen something he shouldn't have seen. His servant, standing nearby, remarked with a grin that he had not known that even monkeys could fall out of bed. His words were full of playful reproach, but there was a subtle hint of something more hidden in them. Igor laughed at the servant's remark and replied that he was ready to tear his stomach for such statements. He was not going to let such phrases go without consequences, even if it was a joke. The weather had remained fine since the previous evening, and even the wind had not blown. On this day, everything was calm. The air was clean, and nothing disturbed the peaceful atmosphere. Igor wondered why Basil was silent about what was happening to the servants. Basil replied that his servants had always been loyal to him, and that the food was ready, which demonstrated their devotion. Now that everything was ready, he could go. But first he asked what date was set as the last day when they would receive answers to their demands, so that everything could be completed on time. The last day was set for tomorrow, and the reparations issue had already been resolved. However, the marriage issue remained unresolved, and this topic continued to worry everyone who was aware of the situation. They had to send a princess who looked like the one in question, or choose another girl. This choice was important and could affect further events. Igor didn't even know if this marriage was really significant or just an excuse to meet Rihanna. But despite this, he understood that everything could have turned out differently. She was the princess's lady-in-waiting, and this time there was no chance of escape. Her fate was already sealed, and she could not change her position without having any room to maneuver. Moreover, the prince used her as a bargaining chip in a political game. His plans were clearly laid out, and she was only part of a complex strategy that had no right to freedom of choice. Everything happened because such a measure promised to be safer for all participants. The girl ready for the upcoming meeting was already getting ready, intending to take part in an important but secret event. The majestic palace of Crichton greeted her with its exquisite architecture. The guard standing at the gate greeted the lady warmly, confirming her arrival and readiness for what was to come next. The guard informed her that His Majesty was already expecting her arrival. The prince had long been prepared for the meeting, and he was escorted through the corridors of the castle to the place where he was already waiting, fully prepared to talk to her. Rihanna was acutely aware that she was being led deeper into the castle. She couldn't help but think that she would not be meeting in an ordinary hall, but most likely in the prince's private chambers, where everything would be more intimate. The man who accompanied her pointed to the door behind which an important audience awaited her. He opened it, and the girl, without wasting time, stepped forward, ready for what was about to be announced. Rihanna realized that she needed to gather her strength and thoughts in order to withstand the moment of the meeting with dignity. This was important not only for her, but also for Dima, for whom she could show the necessary determination. When the girl entered, she immediately said words of apology, sincerely hoping that her appearance would not cause unpleasant consequences. But as soon as she opened her eyes, she was completely shocked by what she saw. The prince, noticing her reaction, asked if she was the one who had requested an audience. He suggested starting a meeting to figure out the reason for her visit, but on his bed sat a girl who was a complete stranger to Rihanna. After a brief caress with the woman, she left, and the prince remained in the room with Rihanna. His thoughts were occupied with the recent event, but he knew that he should not be distracted from what had happened. The prince had already heard of Rihanna from the duke, who had mentioned her in conversation. He knew that the woman was an important figure, but knew little about her personally. It looked like Rihanna was going to leave, but she didn't. She came back because she had something important to tell him, and her resolve was clearly strong. She came up to him and apologized, assuring him that she had not tried to escape at all. This was a surprising admission for him, and he was puzzled by her words. The prince was surprised because she was caught with her cousin, and the situation seemed completely different. He could not understand what exactly she wanted to say. Rihanna tried to explain that her cousin Dima was simply very worried about her, and she could not leave him in trouble. His concern was sincere, but he still doubted her intentions. The prince expressed doubt, asking how he was supposed to believe her words. It all didn't seem as simple as she imagined. Rihanna stated emphatically that she was going to Arundel, and the prince was truly surprised to hear this. He asked her again, not believing his ears. She reaffirmed her words once again, saying that she would go to Arundel instead of the princess. This decision greatly excited her, and she was ready to do anything for this mission. There was silence after her words, which was broken by a loud and sharp cry from the crown prince. It was unexpected, and his reaction filled the room with tension. The girl couldn't understand why he started laughing, and this made her feel uncomfortable. She started to worry, not understanding what had happened. The prince expressed his displeasure, calling her a stupid girl. He had already made his decision, and her words could not change it. He was disappointed that she had come here just to distract him with such a strange statement that he didn't think made sense. She did not ask him to release her brother, but continued to insist that her visit had not been in vain and that her intentions had their meaning. Suddenly, he grabbed her and forcefully removed her outer clothing, ignoring her resistance. She did not expect such aggression, and it shocked her greatly. The prince didn't care that they had lost at Arundel. He knew that she would go there as a hostage anyway, and it was inevitable. He wondered what would happen if she became his prisoner first. Thoughts of her being his began to swirl in his head. Basil suddenly burst into His Majesty's office solemnly, declaring that he had finally received an answer to an important question that had been waiting for a long time. There was confidence in his voice, and he was clearly pleased with this event. Turning around, Basil announced with unexpected regret that he had made a mistake and had apparently mixed up the rooms. He quickly added that he was wrong to be there, and that his visitors usually saw him in a more familiar form. Basil began to look for someone who could be taken for a poor beggar, and hastily asked if Igor had seen a man who looked as he imagined hiding his displeasure. Igor, irritated by this question, no longer concealed his anger, and Basil continued with concern, asking whether Igor had abandoned the image of a beggar, and now by mistake had become like a true knight. Igor couldn't remember the last time he had dressed as nicely as the occasion required. He couldn't even remember the last time his servant had mentioned how often he had washed during the war. Igor noticed that the room was too noisy, and that it seemed that Basil wanted to be drowned in this chaos. Basil, in turn, hoped that they would soon return home, where his wife was waiting for him. At this point, Igor slammed the table hard, and Basil finally began to calm him down, assuring him that he was not trying to insult him. He tried to explain that he just wanted Igor to relax a little. Igor, however, remained a little angry, which was evident in his tense posture. Basil continued to insist on his own, trying to find words to relieve the tension that was building up with each passing minute. Igor stood up and began to pace the room, noticeably losing his place. His servant, who had been watching the whole time, could not understand what was going on and what they wanted from him at that moment. Basil asked what had happened, and Igor replied that it was a messenger from Crichton who had brought important news. He said that the ward of Count Allison, the expected person, was coming here. Igor continued that she wanted to meet him, and his servant, hearing this, asked again, with slight bewilderment. He was not sure that all this was happening for real, but he trusted Igor. Igor confirmed that she really wanted to meet him, to which the servant again expressed doubt. His eyes were filled with bewilderment. He tried to understand what kind of secret was hidden behind this visit. 6 years ago, Igor and Basil, despite the risk, left the palace hiding it from the Empress. They left the palace on horses, heading into the unknown in search of what they needed. They walked for several days, without food or water, waiting for the one Igor hoped to find. However, in the end, they never met the man Igor spoke of. It was all in vain. When they finally reached the port, the man had already sailed to Crichton, leaving Igor and Basil with nothing. Disappointed, they returned empty-handed, which created new problems. The outraged queen began to beat Basil, demanding that he tell her what had happened. She was ready to do anything to find out what had happened and why she and Igor had disappeared for so long. The queen was restless. She wanted to understand where her son and his companion had disappeared, to what had made them leave the palace for so long. Questions poured in, but Basil could not find the right words to answer. Basil, at that moment, realized that perhaps it would be easier for him to just die. He could not understand why he had agreed to this risky act, and he felt the gravity of the situation more and more. The queen, unable to control her rage, believed that the punishment should be severe. She believed that when they started beating him, Basil would remember everything and reveal the truth about where he and Igor had disappeared to. Frightened by the prince's actions, the queen could not resist and ordered Basil to be punished. She tried to find out where he had gone with her son. Inexplicable events were happening to him. Basil had gone too far with his affection for Igor. The queen believed that if something like this happened again, the consequences would be even more severe. Her anger knew no bounds, and punishment was inevitable. As a result, the queen ordered Basil to be deprived of half a year's pay and sentenced to a month's imprisonment. It was a punishment he could not escape, and it was a heavy blow to him. Then Basil thought that he should confess everything. He thought that it would be better to admit what had happened than to continue to hide the truth. But it was not that simple. These thoughts soon disappeared when Basil remembered what the prince had looked like at the port. His image remained vivid in his mind, and despite everything, it was the moment that changed their destinies. Since childhood, the prince had been his mother's puppet. But that day, Igor acted on his own will for the first time. He was no longer just a figure in the queen's hands. He began to show his independence. When the prince saw Basil after the punishment, he was in shock. He could not believe that Basil had survived after everything that had happened to him. It was a moment that both of them would remember for a long time. So the prince and Basil had a secret they kept from each other, knowing that it would remain between them. A secret that strengthened their bond and determined their future path. Igor ordered that Basil should remain alive. This was his demand, and Basil had to fulfill it despite all the worries and suffering. He knew that he had no right to make a mistake. Basil cried for a long time while he was being beaten, and that moment stuck with him forever. He felt how hard it was for him, but he also felt that he had to go through it to become who he was. Finally, Basil smiled, saying that he now owed Igor his whole life. He understood that there was a debt between them that could not be easily passed. Igor's first rebellion was a success. He managed to achieve what he wanted, and it was a moment of triumph for him.